Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've never shared this story online before. I'm still not fully convinced of what I saw that night, but after what happened, I can't just write it off as nothing. This all went down back in May of 2017. I was living alone in this small house outside Morrisville, Vermont. Really isolated spot with just a dirt road connecting me to civilization. My place had this old stone wall running along the back of the property, probably built 100 years ago. Beyond that wall was nothing but woods, thick brush and trees that stretched for miles. I'd always loved the privacy, the quiet, never thought it would become the source of what's probably the most terrifying experience of my life. I'd just gotten a German shepherd puppy, Luna, about 4.5 months old at the time. She was still in that awkward puppy phase, all ears and paws but smart as hell. We'd gone into town that evening to pick up some groceries and stuff for the house. Nothing unusual about the day, just normal errands. It was already dark when we headed back, probably around 9:30 or so. I remember pulling up to the house and shutting off the engine. Usually Luna would wait for me to open the door for her, but that night, the second I cracked my door open, she bolted. I mean bolted. She shot out of the car like something was wrong and ran straight for that stone wall at the edge of the property. She was barking like I'd never heard her bark before, not her normal, "Hey, there's a squirrel" bark. This was aggressive, almost panicked. Her hackles were up, and she was focused intensely on something in the woods beyond the wall. Luna was still just a puppy, so seeing her react like that immediately set me on edge. I quickly grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, one of those heavy mag lights, and went after her. I called her name, but she completely ignored me, which was unusual. She just kept barking at the woods, her whole body rigid. When I reached the wall, I shined my light in the direction she was barking. The brush was really thick there, and at first I didn't see anything, but then I heard it. Movement. Something was definitely moving through the underbrush about 20 feet away, not like a deer or something small. These were heavy, deliberate steps. I still remember the sound distinctly because it didn't sound like an animal on 4 legs. It sounded bipedal, like footsteps, 2 feet, not 4, but slower, more cautious than a person would normally walk. My first thought was that someone was trespassing on my property, maybe a hunter who'd gotten lost, or some local teens messing around. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No response, just those slow, deliberate footsteps. I moved closer to the wall, and that's when I saw it, a dark shape moving through the trees. Not rushing, but deliberately, like it was trying to be quiet. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It crouched behind a large tree about 25 feet in. Here's the thing that still freaks me out when I think about it. Whatever it wasn't hiding completely. It was like it was watching me. The tree wasn't wide enough to conceal it fully. I could make out a bulky, wide shape, much bigger than a person, and its head kept peeking out slightly, then pulling back, like it was trying to observe me while staying concealed. Luna was going absolutely ballistic at this point. She's a brave dog now, but as a puppy, I'd never seen her act so aggressive. It was like pure instinct had taken over. I lifted my flashlight higher to get a better look, and that's when I saw them. Eyes. 2 eyes reflecting my flashlight beam from behind that tree. But they weren't the yellow-green reflection you'd expect from a deer or the dull reflection of a bear's eyes. These were bright red-orange eyes, almost glowing in the darkness. I've hunted these woods for years, and I've never seen eyeshine like that on any animal native to Vermont. A chill ran through my entire body. The thing was still partially hidden, but I could tell it was tall. Taller than me, and I'm 6'2". The shape was just wrong. Too big for a human, wrong proportions for a bear. At that moment, Luna made a move like she was going to jump the wall and charge into the woods. I panicked and called her back sharply. "Luna, come!" I was terrified she'd run after whatever this was and get hurt. Thankfully, she listened, though she kept growling, her eyes never leaving that spot in the woods. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on those eyes. They followed my movement. That's what really got to me. The intelligence behind them. This wasn't an animal reacting on instinct. It was observing, calculating. When I reached the house, I practically dragged Luna inside, locked the door, and closed all the blinds. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it pounding in my ears. Luna wouldn't settle down. She kept pacing by the windows facing the woods, growling low in her throat. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, a bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe, but the way it moved, the way it watched me. Bears don't behave like that. And those eyes, I've encountered bears before, and their eyes don't reflect light that way. I barely slept that night. I kept hearing noises outside, subtle things, like branches breaking or something moving along the wall. Luna remained on high alert, occasionally running to different windows and growling. The next evening, my buddy Mike came over. I hadn't told him about what happened. Honestly, I felt stupid even thinking about it. We were having a beer on the back deck when we both heard it at the same time. A roar, not a growl, not a howl, but a deep guttural roar coming from those same woods. I've heard bears, coyotes, even moose in rut. This wasn't like any of those. It was deeper, more resonant, almost like it was coming from something with a massive chest cavity. It happened 3 times in quick succession, each one making the hair on my arm stand up. Mike's face went white. "What the hell was that?" he asked. Luna was inside, and she started barking frantically, trying to get through the glass door. "I don't know," I said. But I was thinking about those eyes from the night before. Another roar echoed through the trees, closer this time. We didn't need to discuss it. We both went inside immediately and locked the door. That night, Mike didn't leave until morning. Neither of us wanted to admit how scared we were, but we sat up most of the night, jumping at every sound. The next few weeks were tense. Luna's behavior completely changed. She refused, and I mean refused, to go near that part of the yard again. She'd stop at the edge of the driveway, her tail tucked between her legs, and growl at the tree line. Nothing could persuade her to go further. I started noticing other things too. Sometimes at night, I'd hear heavy footsteps circling the property. Once, I found strange impressions in the soft ground near the wall. Not clear footprints, but large depressions that didn't match any animal tracks I knew. I became obsessed with figuring out what I'd seen. I told myself it was just a bear, had to be, but the more I researched, the more uneasy I became. I started looking up Bigfoot sightings, something I'd always scoffed at before, and found descriptions that matched what I'd experienced: the red-orange eye shine, the quiet bipedal walking, the hiding behavior, the deep roars. There were even reports from nearby counties describing similar encounters. People talked about the way these creatures would peek around trees, observing but trying to stay hidden. The similarities to my experience were uncanny. About a week after the initial incident, I was up late watching TV when the power suddenly went out. Not unusual in rural Vermont, but the timing made my skin crawl. Luna, who had been sleeping at my feet, immediately jumped up and started that same aggressive barking from before, facing the back of the house. I grabbed my flashlight and, against my better judgment, went to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. I didn't see anything at first, just darkness. But then, as I scanned the tree line, I caught movement near the stone wall. Something large was moving along it. I held my breath and kept the light trained on that spot. For a brief moment, I saw it clearly. A massive, broad-shouldered figure, easily 7 feet tall, moving with surprising grace for its size. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. This thing was upright, bipedal, with long arms that swung slightly as it walked. It paused near the corner of my property, and though I couldn't make out its face clearly, I knew it was looking right at my window. Those same red-orange eyes reflected in my flashlight beam for just a second before it stepped back into the tree line and disappeared. I was frozen in place, my whole body cold with fear. Luna was going crazy, scratching at the door like she wanted to get out and confront it, which was bizarre given how terrified she'd been of that area before. It was like she was trying to protect me. The power came back on about 20 minutes later, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, my shotgun across my lap, waiting for what I don't know. The next day, I went out to examine the area where I'd seen the figure. The ground was too hard to show footprints, but there was one thing I couldn't explain. A small sapling near the wall had been broken, not cut or chewed by an animal, but snapped cleanly about 6 feet off the ground. I started carrying my gun whenever I went outside after dark. I installed motion sensor lights all around the property. I even set up a game camera facing the wall, hoping to catch something on film. The camera recorded hours of footage, but all I ever caught were deer and the occasional fox. Whatever had been visiting my property was either gone or smart enough to avoid the camera. But here's the thing, Luna never forgot. For the entire time I lived in that house, she would not go near that stone wall or the woods behind it. She'd stop at an invisible line and refuse to go further, her eyes fixed on the trees like she was waiting for something to emerge. I moved away from that house about a year later. I told myself it was for a job opportunity, but honestly, I never felt safe there again. I never got another clear sighting like that first night, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the wind was still, I'd hear those heavy footsteps circling the property or catch glimpses of movement just beyond the tree line. I still don't know what I encountered that night. I want to believe it was just a bear, that my mind played tricks on me because it was dark and I was alone. But then I remember those eyes looking back at me from the woods, intelligent and calculating, and I know whatever I saw wasn't any normal animal. Luna's 6 years old now, and she's as brave a dog as you'll ever meet. But to this day, she has an unusual reaction whenever we're hiking and come across a certain type of dense, brushy forest. She'll stop, her ears will prick up, and she'll stare into the trees with the same intensity she had that night by the stone wall. And I find myself scanning the woods too, looking for those red-orange eyes watching from the shadows. Story 2. I've never told this story outside my immediate family and a couple close friends, because honestly, who would believe me? I'm still struggling to process what happened that morning in January 2019, and writing this down makes my hands shake. But I need to get this out there, even if just to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. I was 14 at the time, living with my family in Kane, Pennsylvania. Our house sits at the edge of town with a stretch of woods behind it. These aren't deep forests like you'd find further north, just typical Pennsylvania woodland with deer trails and small creeks running through. Wildlife was common: deer, foxes, the occasional black bear in summer, but nothing ever came too close to the house. That January had been particularly cold. We'd had several snowstorms back to back, and I remember being obsessed with checking the snow levels to see if school might be cancelled. That's why I was up before 5 in the morning on that day. I'd heard the wind howling all night and wanted to see how much more snow had fallen. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, facing the backyard and those woods I mentioned. My friend Melissa was staying over, still asleep in the sleeping bag on my floor. I remember tiptoeing around her to get to the window, trying not to wake her up. I pushed aside my curtain and pressed my face close to the glass, squinting through the darkness to see the snow. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe a garbage can that had blown over in the wind, but then I realized it was moving slightly. There was something crouched in the snow, just about 6 feet from the side of our house. Something big and black. I froze. My breath fogged up the window and I quickly wiped it away with my sleeve, not wanting to lose sight of whatever was out there. The motion was so instinctive. I wish I'd just let the window fog up and crawled back to bed instead. The thing was hunched down, doing something with its hands or paws or whatever they were, in the snow. It looked like it was studying something or maybe digging. The yard light from our neighbor's house cast just enough of a glow that I could make out a massive, wide body covered in thick, dark hair. Way too large to be a raccoon or even a bear. I stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds, unable to move, just watching it. Then, as if it sensed me staring, it slowly turned its head toward my window. I'll never forget that moment as long as I live. Our eyes met. Its eyes were dark, set deep in its face. They reflected a tiny bit of light, but mostly they were just black, aware, intelligent. It was looking at me, not just in my direction. Then it stood up. God, it was tall. I'm terrible with estimating heights, but it towered over the fence between our yard and the neighbor's, which is about 6 feet high, maybe 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. Shoulders too wide, arms too long, hanging down almost to its knees. The whole body was covered in this black fur that looked thick and matted in places, especially around the shoulders. Not sleek like a bear's coat, but messy, almost shaggy. The face, though, the face had less hair, darker skin showing through that flat nose, that wide mouth. No expression I could read. What terrified me most was how it moved, so smooth, so deliberate. It didn't lumber like a bear or move jerkily like deer do. It stood fully upright like a person, and then, oh God, it took one step toward my window. That broke my paralysis. I ran out of my room so fast I slammed my hip into my dresser, which should have hurt like hell, but I didn't even feel it. I burst into my brother Ethan's room. He was 16 then, and practically dived onto his bed. There's something outside. I remember whisper screaming, shaking him awake. Something big. Ethan tried to calm me down, thinking I'd had a nightmare, but something in my face must have convinced him. He got up and grabbed a baseball bat from behind his door. We were both too scared to go back to my room right away, so we huddled in his closet with the door cracked, listening. It hit me then that I'd left Melissa alone in my room. I felt awful, but I was too terrified to go back. After what seemed like forever, Ethan finally whispered, "We need to check on your friend." We crept back to my room. Melissa was sitting up in her sleeping bag, looking confused and scared. She hadn't seen anything. She'd just woken up to find me gone and heard us whispering in the hallway. "There's something outside my window," I told her, my voice shaking. "Something big." I couldn't bring myself to go near the window again, so Ethan did. He peeked through the curtain, bat raised like he could somehow hit something 2 stories down. "I don't see anything," he said after a minute. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" But I was sure. More sure than I've ever been of anything. I described what I'd seen, and even saying it out loud made my skin crawl. The way it had looked at me, like it knew me, like it had been waiting. Eventually, Ethan convinced me to look outside again. By then, the sky was starting to lighten just a bit. Whatever had been there was gone, with no sign it had ever existed. The snow around where it had been standing was smooth. The wind had been blowing all night, covering any tracks almost immediately. I remember feeling both relieved and somehow cheated, like without evidence. I couldn't trust my own eyes. We woke our parents around 6, but they were skeptical. Mom thought I'd had a vivid dream or seen a bear, despite me insisting bears don't stand that tall or look at you that way. Dad went outside to check but found nothing unusual. The fresh snowfall had covered everything. What's always bothered me since is our dog, Max. He's a German Shepherd mix who barks at everything: squirrels, delivery people, leaves blowing across the yard. That morning, he was completely quiet. He slept through the whole thing in my parents' room. Whatever was outside, Max didn't alert to it at all, which makes no sense unless he was too afraid to bark. That thought keeps me up at night sometimes. School wasn't cancelled that day, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept seeing those eyes when I closed mine. I spent the next few nights sleeping in Ethan's room on a mattress on his floor. My parents thought I was being dramatic, but Ethan believed me. He started looking stuff up online about local wildlife. Could it have been a bear standing up? He asked one night. Bears don't look at you like that, I said. They don't study you. The next few weeks I was jumpy about everything. I kept my curtains closed day and night. I stopped looking out windows after dark. I made excuses not to take the trash out if it was getting dark. Everyone except Ethan thought I was overreacting to a dream or shadow. But about 3 weeks later, something happened that made me sure I wasn't crazy. Dad came in from getting firewood one evening looking pale. He said he'd found weird tracks at the edge of the woods. Not deer or bear, something with a longer stride that walked on 2 legs. He'd followed them a little way, but lost them where they entered the thicker trees. He took pictures on his phone, but they weren't very clear, just deep impressions in muddy snow. But I could see they were big, much bigger than a human foot. Dad tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone with snowshoes, maybe a bear walking funny. But I could tell he was unsettled. Mom insisted it was probably just neighborhood kids messing around. That became the official family explanation. But sometimes I'd catch Dad looking out toward the woods with a concerned expression. I've spent countless hours researching what I saw. I know what people will say, that it was a bear or my imagination or sleep paralysis, but I was wide awake. And bears don't look at you with recognition. They don't have that intelligence in their eyes. Every description I've read about Bigfoot matches what I saw. The height, the build, the long arms, the way it moved. I never believed in any of that stuff before, but now I'm certain. What else could it have been? It's been 4 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. Sometimes when I'm home from college and staying in my old room, I wake up with the certainty that something is watching me through the window. I've never seen it again, but sometimes, especially in winter, I hear weird sounds from the woods. Not animal sounds, something different, almost like wood knocking against wood. The worst part isn't even the creature itself. It's the feeling I had when our eyes met. This wasn't just some animal. It was thinking, assessing, maybe even recognizing me specifically. Like it had been watching our house, watching me, for who knows how long before I happened to spot it. I don't go into those woods anymore. None of us do, really, though no one admits that's why. We've never discussed putting up security cameras or motion lights, but I wish we would. I need evidence. Not to convince others, but to convince myself that I'm not losing my mind. I still have nightmares about those eyes, about what might have happened if I'd opened the window instead of running away. About what it wanted, crouched there in the snow so close to our house. Was it curious, hungry, or something else entirely? I don't know if it's still out there, watching our house from the trees. But on snowy winter mornings, I keep my curtains closed tight. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen, and some eyes, once they've found you, never really stop watching. Story. I've been a trapper in northern British Columbia for almost 20 years, and I've seen plenty of weird shit in the backcountry. Bears, wolves, moose, all the usual stuff that'll make your heart race when you encounter them. But what happened to me in the Atlin region back in January 2004 still keeps me up at night sometimes. I'd set up a winter trap line about 20 miles out from the nearest logging road, total wilderness. No cell service, no other people. Nothing but snow and trees and silence. I'd been running this particular line for 3 seasons, so I knew the area pretty well. Planned to stay out there for 5 days, checking and resetting traps, maybe bringing home enough fur to make the trip worthwhile. The first couple days went normal enough. Weather was cold but clear, probably hovering around 15 below zero. I was catching a few marten, missed a lynx, but overall having a decent run. Nothing to write home about, but not a waste of time either. On the third day, I decided to push deeper into this basin I'd been eyeing on previous trips. It was a good 6-hour snowmobile ride from my main camp, but something about the animal sign in that area had me curious. Lots of tracks, good habitat. Figured I might set a few more traps before heading back to the main camp. But the day got away from me. By the time I finished setting the last trap, the light was fading fast. In January up here, you've only got about 6 hours of decent daylight. I knew I wouldn't make it back to main camp before dark, so I decided to make an overnight camp right there in the basin. I'm no rookie. I've spent hundreds of nights in the bush. I carved out a trench in the snow, about 7 feet long by 3 feet wide, using my shovel. Set up my canvas shelter over it. Not much more than a tarp, really, but it breaks the wind and holds in some heat. Got my small stove going, ate some jerky and instant noodles, then crawled into my sleeping bag around 9 o'clock. The temperature was dropping fast. I fell asleep almost immediately, the kind of deep sleep you only get when you've been working your ass off in the cold all day. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. Had to be after midnight. Something had jerked me awake. At first, I thought maybe a branch had fallen near my shelter, or maybe I dreamed it, but then I heard it again, a deep, rhythmic grunting sound, not like a bear or a moose. Nothing I'd ever heard before in all my years in the bush. It was like, I don't know how to describe it exactly, like someone trying to clear their throat, but deeper, much deeper, and deliberate. Like it wasn't just some involuntary animal noise. My first thought was maybe another trapper had wandered into the area and was clearing their throat outside. But that made no sense. No one else runs lines out this far, and I hadn't seen another track or sign of humans in days. I lay there frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, just listening. The grunting continued, maybe 30 or 40 yards from my shelter. Then it stopped. What came next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. Footsteps, heavy footsteps in the snow moving toward my shelter, not the 4-beat pattern of something on all fours. This was bipedal, 2 feet, walking upright. My rifle was right beside me, but suddenly I was too scared to move, too scared to even reach for it. Something in my gut told me that whatever was out there, my rifle wouldn't be enough. The footsteps came closer, crunching in the snow, slow, deliberate steps, not sneaking, just walking, like it wasn't worried about being heard, like it didn't need to be stealthy. The steps circled around to the back of my shelter where my head was. Then they stopped. I was lying on my back, staring up at the canvas, maybe 2 feet above my face. The night was clear and cold. With a 3/4 moon, I could see the silhouette of trees through the thin material of my shelter, and then I saw something else, a shadow, blocking out the moonlight. Something big was standing right beside my shelter. The canvas shifted slightly as something brushed against it. Then the snow wall that I'd built up beside my head, the wall that was packed solid and about 2 feet thick, it pushed inward, just slightly. Just enough to let me know that whatever was out there was pressing against it. Then came the sniffing, long, deep inhales right above where my head was. Not quick sniffs like a bear or a wolf. These were slow, deliberate sniffs, like it was really trying to get my scent, like it was analyzing me. I've never been so terrified in my entire life. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just lay there listening to this thing sniff me through the shelter wall. It went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Then the sniffing stopped. The shadow moved away from the shelter. I heard it take a few steps back, then let out one more of those deep grunts, lower and longer than before, almost like it was, I don't know, communicating something. Then it walked away. I could hear the footsteps moving west, toward the center of the basin, getting fainter until I couldn't hear them anymore. I lay there for hours, clutching my rifle, too scared to move or make a sound. I kept expecting it to come back, but it didn't. Eventually, the sky started to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Only then did I work up the courage to crawl out of my shelter. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, probably 25 below. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. But I barely noticed. I was too focused on the snow around my shelter, and there they were, tracks, but not just any tracks. These were the biggest footprints I've ever seen, deep impressions in the snow, at least 16 inches long and maybe 8 inches wide. They were clearly foot-shaped, with what looked like 5 toes at the front. The stride between them was huge, easily twice what I could stretch. I followed them with my flashlight. They came from the east, circled my shelter exactly where I'd heard the footsteps, stopped right where I'd felt the pressure against the snow wall, then headed west into the basin. What hit me hardest was how deliberate the path was. This thing hadn't been wandering randomly. It had come directly to my shelter, inspected it, then left, like it knew exactly what it was doing. With daylight coming, I should have felt safer, but I didn't. I quickly packed up my gear, wanting nothing more than to get the hell out of there. But something made me pause. Professional curiosity, maybe. Or just the need to confirm what I was seeing wasn't some hallucination from the cold. I decided to check one of my trap sets that was in the direction the tracks had gone. It was about half a mile away, in a small clearing surrounded by thick spruce. As I approached the trap site, my stomach dropped. More of those same huge tracks. They went right up to where I'd set a box trap for marten. The trap had been picked up from where I'd carefully placed it, moved about 2 feet, then set back down. Not sprung, not damaged, just moved, like something had been curious about it. That was it for me. I didn't bother checking the rest of my traps, didn't care about losing the gear. I just needed to get out of there. I fired up my snowmobile and rode straight back to my main camp, packed everything up there too, and headed for the logging road. I was back in town by nightfall, still shaking. I've never gone back to that section of my trap line, just abandoned it completely. Lost a few $100s in traps and gear, but it wasn't worth going back. Not after what I saw. I've thought about it 1,000 times since then. Tried to convince myself it was a bear walking on its hind legs, or maybe another trapper playing a trick, but I know better. Bears don't walk upright for that long in deep snow, and no human could leave tracks that big or move that quietly in the bush at night. The old-timers around here talk about Sasquatch sometimes. Most people laugh it off. I used to laugh too. I don't anymore. Whatever found me that night wasn't hunting me, it wasn't aggressive, it was just curious, checking me out, and somehow that's even more unsettling. I still trap, still spend weeks alone in the backcountry, but I'm different now, more cautious. I don't camp as deep in the bush as I used to, always sleep with a fire going. And I never, ever set up in basins like that one anymore. Sometimes, when I'm out checking traps and the forest gets really quiet, that unnatural kind of quiet where even the birds stop singing, I get the feeling I'm being watched. I don't know if it's the same thing that found me that night. Don't know if there are more of them out there. Don't really want to know, to be honest. All I know is that the wilderness is bigger and stranger than most people realize. There are things out there that don't fit into the neat categories we've created, things that mostly want to be left alone. And if you're ever up in northern BC, running traps in the dead of winter, and you hear a deep, rhythmic grunting in the night, pack up and leave. Don't wait until morning, don't try to get a look, just go, because whatever it is, it's already gotten a good look at you. Story 4. I've lived in White County, Georgia for 40 years now, built my house, raised my family, and learned every inch of these woods. Or at least I thought I had until last April. It was about 7:30 in the morning, just an ordinary Tuesday. I remember because I had to drive into town later for a doctor's appointment. The air was still cool, but you could feel spring settling in. The dogwoods were starting to bloom, and everything had that fresh green smell that comes after the last frost. I've had the same morning routine for decades. Coffee on the back porch, check the garden, then walk around to my shop to plan what projects I might tackle that day. Nothing special, just the quiet rhythm of country living. I was standing at the corner of my shop, sipping the last of my coffee and thinking about fixing that leaky gutter when I saw them. 2 figures walking upright, crossing my gravel driveway at the bend, about 70 yards from where I stood. They were moving from left to right, from the thick hardwoods on one side over to the mixed pines and oak on the other. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Neighbors? No, we're too far out. Hunters? Not on my property, and besides, they didn't move like humans. Bears? I've seen plenty of bears in these mountains over the years. These weren't bears. These things walked smoothly on 2 legs with a natural stride that sent ice down my spine. Both were covered in dark brown hair, not fur exactly, more like a shaggy coat that hung from their bodies. Their arms were unnaturally long, swinging slightly as they walked. The larger one was massive, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. The smaller one followed about 3 steps behind, probably a foot shorter but built the same. They crossed my driveway without hesitation, without looking toward me, without making a sound on the gravel that should have crunched under their weight. I couldn't move. My coffee mug just hung there in my hand, halfway to my lips. I think I stopped breathing. Their heads were what struck me most. Not bear-like at all, but more human-shaped with this strange sloped back and top. No visible neck. The head just sat directly on those massive shoulders. I couldn't make out facial features at that distance, but the profile was unmistakable. They disappeared into the trees on the other side of my drive, and suddenly I could breathe again. My hands were shaking so bad I had to set the mug down on the corner of my workbench before I dropped it. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just staring at the spot where they'd crossed. Then, like I was moving through molasses, I forced myself to walk toward that section of driveway. Part of me was terrified I'd run into them, but a stronger part needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. The gravel didn't show footprints, of course, but the soft ground beside the drive was another story. There were depressions there, not clear tracks like you'd see in mud, but unmistakable impressions where something heavy had stepped. I wear a size 12 boot, and these impressions were easily twice that, 15, maybe 18 inches long. I put my foot next to one for comparison and felt sick to my stomach. Whatever made these was enormous. I looked up at the woods where they'd disappeared. The undergrowth was thick with new spring growth, but I could see where branches had been pushed aside, a trail of sorts leading deeper into the forest that I thought I knew so well. I didn't follow it. I'm not ashamed to admit that. 40 years in these mountains taught me respect for things bigger than me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over what I'd seen, trying to make it fit into the natural world I understood. Black bears stand on their hind legs sometimes, but they don't walk that way. Not smoothly, not naturally. These things moved like walking upright was how they were built. I didn't tell my wife. What would I say? "Hey, honey, I saw Bigfoot this morning. 2 of them, actually." She'd think I was having some kind of episode, so I kept it to myself, but I started paying closer attention. About a week after the sighting, I was up late reading when I heard it. A knocking sound coming from behind the barn. 2 sharp knocks, then silence, then 3 more, like someone hitting a tree with a stick or a rock. It was almost midnight, pitch black outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the back porch, listening. Nothing but spring peepers and the distant hoot of an owl. I was about to go back inside when it came again. 2 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Different location this time, further back toward the creek. This continued for weeks, always late at night or just before dawn. Always sets of 2 or 3 knocks, never close enough to see what was making them, but always in that same general area behind the barn where the woods get thick. My coon hound, Buck, who's never been afraid of anything in his 12 years, started refusing to go past the garden after dark. He'd get to the edge of the yard, hackles up, and just plant his feet. No amount of coaxing would get him to budge. During the day, he'd go a little further, but he'd keep looking back at the house like he was making sure his escape route was clear. About a month after I saw them cross my driveway, I found one of my salt blocks flipped over and broken clean in half. These aren't small blocks. They weigh about 50 pounds, and I use them for the deer and occasional elk that pass through. Whatever broke it didn't leave tooth or claw marks like a bear would. It was just snapped in two, like someone had picked it up and cracked it against something. I haven't seen them cross my driveway again, but sometimes when the light is thin, dawn or dusk, I catch glimpses of shapes moving through the trees, never clear enough to be sure. Just the sense of something large shifting between trunks, careful to stay in the shadows. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why they're here, what they want. My property sits between two large tracts of national forest land. My driveway, which cuts through about a quarter mile of woods, makes an easy path between these areas. There's a creek corridor about 200 yards behind my property that runs for miles. I figure they're probably following the water, using my drive as a convenient crossing. I started leaving apples out near where I saw them cross. They disappear overnight. Could be raccoons or deer taking them, but I don't think so. Whatever eats them leaves no cores, no seeds, everything gone like they were never there. Last week I was out checking my garden fence just after sunset when I heard breathing. Deep, heavy breathing, just on the other side of the tree line. Not animal panting, but slow, deliberate breaths. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. It was close, maybe 30 feet away, but hidden in the gathering darkness. I backed toward the house, never taking my eyes off that spot in the trees. The breathing stopped. Then I heard a soft knocking. Tap, tap, like knuckles on wood. I didn't wait to hear more. I got inside and locked the door. The strange thing is, I don't feel threatened. Watched? Yes. Studied. Definitely, but not in danger. It's like they're as curious about me as I am about them. They could have approached the house any time in these past months, but they keep their distance, observing from the edge of the woods. I've never reported what I saw. Who would I tell? The sheriff would think I've gone senile. The Forest Service might laugh me off, or worse, send people out here tramping through the woods, scaring away whatever's living there, and I don't want the attention, don't want my property overrun with Bigfoot hunters and their cameras and equipment, so I keep it to myself, this strange new relationship with the woods around my home. I still do my morning routine, but now I pause at the corner of my shop and look toward that bend in the driveway. Sometimes I raise my coffee mug in a silent greeting, just in case they're watching. I don't know what they are. I don't have fancy names or theories. All I know is that for 40 years I thought I understood these mountains, and now I realize how little I actually know. There are things in these woods, intelligent things, that have probably been here far longer than me. Things that walk on two legs but aren't human, that communicate with knocks and stay hidden in shadows. Last night I heard the knocks again, closer to the house than ever before. 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. Without thinking, I knocked back on the wall beside me. 2 times, pause, 3 times. The woods went completely silent. Even the insects stopped chirping. Then it came again. 2 knocks, 3 knocks, but from a different direction. They were answering me. I live differently now. I'm more careful, more observant. I don't go into the deep woods alone anymore, especially not at dawn or dusk. I keep my distance, and they keep theirs. It's a strange respect between us, unspoken but understood. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my porch in the evening, I swear I can feel eyes on me from the darkness beyond my yard. I don't shine lights that way anymore. I just sit quietly, acknowledging in my mind that I'm not alone out here. Never really was. Story 5. I've been debating for years whether to share this, but it's been nearly 20 years, and I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, heart pounding, thinking about it. I'm not some attention seeker or someone who believes every conspiracy theory out there. I'm just a normal guy who experienced something in fall of 2004 that I still can't explain. Back then, I was 19, working night shifts at McDonald's in Steinbeck to save up for community college. I didn't have a car, couldn't afford one, so I biked everywhere. The McDonald's was about 7 miles from my parents' place, mostly along dark country roads that wound between farms and patches of woods. During summer it wasn't so bad, but as fall settled in, the ride home got darker and creepier by the day. This happened on a Saturday night in October. The temperature had dropped pretty quickly that week, and there was this weird fog hanging low over the fields. I finished my shift around 10 at night, zipped up my hoodie, and headed out on my bike. My plan was to stop by my girlfriend Amber's place on the way home, but I never made it that far. About 3 miles into my ride, I noticed my front brake was rubbing against the wheel. It was making this annoying squeaking sound and slowing me down, so I stopped under one of the few streetlights along that stretch to fix it. It was one of those old-style yellow lights that barely illuminates anything, but creates this little bubble of visibility in the darkness. I flipped my bike over and was messing with the brake cable when I heard something. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe some animal rustling in the tall grass beside the road. But then, I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps. Not like a deer or coyote, but something big and heavy walking through the field to my right. I paused and listened harder. The footsteps stopped too. That's when I got my first chill. Whatever it was seemed to be responding to my movements. About 100 yards away, a farm dog started barking like crazy. Not just the normal, "Hey, someone's here" bark, but that frantic, terrified bark dogs make when they're genuinely scared. I could hear its chain rattling as it pulled against whatever it was tied to. Then I heard a loud snap, and the dog yelped once before going completely silent. That's when I knew I needed to get the hell out of there. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the brake fixed. I kept telling myself it was probably just a bear, even though we didn't have many bears in that area. As I was setting my bike upright, I heard those heavy footsteps again, closer now, moving deliberately toward the road, toward me. I was just about to jump on my bike when something stepped into the edge of the streetlight's glow. I'll never forget what I saw. Standing there, maybe 15 feet away from me, was something that looked like a man, but wasn't. It was huge, towering at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in thick, matted black fur from head to toe, except for its face, which had less hair and showed dark skin underneath. The thing that struck me most was its build. This wasn't some guy in a costume. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. It had this massive chest and shoulders, way wider than any bodybuilder I've ever seen. Its arms were enormous, hanging down so its hands reached almost to its knees, and its head, it didn't sit on a neck like ours do. It was like its head just merged directly into its shoulders. The face is what haunts me the most. It had these deep-set eyes, closer together than a human's, and they reflected the streetlight with a reddish glow. Its nose was wide and flat, and I could see its nostrils flaring as it breathed. I couldn't make out its mouth clearly, but I remember seeing a flash of teeth when I don't know how else to describe it, except to say it grimaced at me. For what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body was frozen. There was intelligence in those eyes. Not animal intelligence, but something that understood exactly what I was and was, deciding what to do about me. Then it made this sound, not quite a growl, not quite a grunt, and charged. I've never moved so fast in my life. I jumped on my bike and pedaled harder than I ever had before. I didn't look back at first, just focused on getting away, but I could hear it behind me. It was running, sometimes on 2 legs with this weird loping stride, and sometimes dropping down to use its knuckles like a gorilla. The sound of those heavy footfalls slapping against the asphalt will stay with me forever. After about 10 yards of chasing me, it suddenly stopped. I risked a glance back and saw it standing in the middle of the road, swaying slightly from side to side, just watching me. It was like it was sending me a message. This is my territory. Don't come back. Then, in one fluid motion, it leaped over the ditch at the side of the road, cleared it completely in one bound, and disappeared into the darkness of the field beyond. I didn't stop pedaling until I reached Amber's house. I was hyperventilating so bad when I got there that she thought I was having a heart attack. I couldn't even speak for the first few minutes, just sat on her porch shaking. When I finally told her what happened, I could see she didn't believe me. She thought I'd seen a bear, or maybe some guys from school playing a prank. But I know what I saw. Bears don't stand 7 feet tall on 2 legs and chase you down a road. And no human could move the way that thing moved. That effortless switch between running upright and on all fours, the way it cleared that ditch in one jump. And no costume could replicate those proportions or the way its muscles moved under that fur. I ended up staying at Amber's that night. No way was I getting back on that bike in the dark. Her parents weren't thrilled, but they could see I was genuinely terrified and let me crash on their couch. I didn't sleep at all though, just lay there replaying what I'd seen over and over in my head. The next day, I convinced Amber to drive me back to the spot. I don't know what I expected to find, footprints maybe, or some sign that would prove I wasn't crazy. But it had rained lightly overnight, and the road was wet. There was nothing to see. We did drive past the farm where I'd heard the dog. I spotted an empty doghouse with a broken chain lying beside it. I wanted to stop and ask the owners what happened to their dog, but Amber thought that was a bad idea. Looking back, I wish I had. I told a few other people about what happened. My parents, a couple close friends, even a local sheriff's deputy who was a regular at McDonald's. Most of them reacted like Amber, suggesting explanations that made more sense to them. A bear, a prank, my imagination running wild in the dark. The deputy did say there had been a few reports over the years of something similar in the woods around there, but nothing confirmed. I quit my job at McDonald's the following week. Told them I needed to focus on school, but the truth was I couldn't face that bike ride anymore. I started working at the gas station closer to home instead, even though it paid less. For months afterward, I had nightmares about those eyes staring at me from the darkness. I still do sometimes. I've researched everything I could find about Sasquatch sightings since then. A lot of the descriptions match what I saw, the height, the build, the way it moved. But reading other people's accounts doesn't make me feel any better. It just confirms that there's something out there that science can't explain. I've never gone back to that stretch of road at night. I got my driver's license and a cheap used car as soon as I could afford it. Even now, when I visit my parents, I moved to Columbus after college. I take the long way around to avoid that spot. Amber and I broke up a few months after the incident. She got tired of me refusing to bike anywhere at night and thought I was being ridiculous for still being scared. We just drifted apart. Last I heard, she's married with kids now. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if maybe the stress of working late shifts and taking early classes just caught up with me. But then I remember those eyes, so focused, so aware, and I know it was real. Whatever I saw that night, it wasn't human, but it wasn't just an animal either. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist in our modern world but does. I still can't drive down dark country roads without constantly checking my mirrors. I still get a knot in my stomach when I hear about Sasquatch sightings. And I still remember the feeling of being hunted, of being sized up by something that could have torn me apart if it wanted to. I don't know why it stopped chasing me. Maybe it was just warning me off its territory. Maybe it wasn't actually trying to hurt me at all. But the way it looked at me, with recognition, with intelligence, makes me think these creatures understand more than we give them credit for. I'm sharing this now because I need someone to believe me. For almost 20 years, I've carried this experience alone, doubting myself because everyone around me doubted me. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 6. I've never really talked about this before. Not with anyone who would take me seriously anyway. It's been 14 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've been hunting my entire life, grew up in a family where hunting season was practically a religious holiday. By October 2009, I'd been hunting elk in Colorado for nearly 20 years. I thought I knew those woods. I thought I understood what was out there. I was wrong. I'd planned this solo trip to the Flattops wilderness for months, had all my gear prepped, my topographical maps marked, and a week's worth of supplies. Found this perfect spot near a ridgeline that overlooked a small drainage, exactly the kind of place where elk move through in the early morning. The evening I arrived, I set up camp, feeling confident. The weather was crisp, that perfect fall temperature where your breath just starts to fog. I remember thinking it was going to be an ideal hunt. I woke up around 4 in the morning. It was pitch black and damn cold, probably in the low 20s. I layered up, grabbed my rifle, packed some jerky and water, and headed out with my headlamp cutting through the darkness. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of frost under my boots. That silence. It's something you appreciate when you spend enough time in the wilderness, just the occasional breeze through the pines. About 30 minutes into my hike, something changed. Hard to explain exactly what it was at first. The forest felt different. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? It was like that, but worse. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Then I took a few more steps. That's when I heard it. Footsteps that weren't mine. Heavy, deliberate. They seemed to be coming from the slope below me, staying just out of sight in the trees. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. Not immediately, but with just enough delay that it couldn't be an echo. I've tracked deer, elk, bear, mountain lion, everything that walks these mountains. These footsteps weren't any of those, too heavy for a deer or lion, not lumbering enough for a bear, and they were bipedal, 2 feet, not 4. I tried to tell myself it was just another hunter, but deep down I knew better. No hunter moves like that, shadowing someone else without announcing themselves. That's how accidents happen. I picked up my pace slightly, heading toward a clearing I knew was about a quarter mile ahead. Figured in the open I'd be able to see whatever was following me. That's when I heard the second set of footsteps, these coming from ahead of me, from the direction I was walking. My blood went cold. I was between them. Whatever they were, there were 2, and they had positioned themselves on either side of me. I'm not a man who scares easily. I've stared down angry moose and had close calls with bears. But this was different. This was calculated. I crouched down behind a pile of fallen trees, trying to control my breathing, which suddenly seemed impossibly loud in the pre-dawn silence. The sun was just starting to lighten the sky, not bright enough to see clearly, but enough that the forest was no longer pitch black. That's when I saw it, or rather, a glimpse of it. Through the trees about 50 yards away, a massive figure moved. It was covered in dark brown hair, matted in some places. What struck me most were the proportions, shoulders far broader than any person I've ever seen, arms that seemed to hang almost to its knees. I've been around plenty of large guys in my life. My brother-in-law is 6'5" and built like a linebacker. This thing made him look small. It moved with purpose, stepping deliberately from one tree to another, staying partially obscured but definitely aware of my position. I felt exposed, despite being hidden. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. I didn't want to believe it. But what else could it be? I'd seen enough hunting shows debunking Bigfoot to have laughed at the idea before. I wasn't laughing now. I decided to try to retreat. Not back to camp, that was too far, but to a rocky outcrop about 200 yards to my east. I figured I could get a better vantage point, maybe see exactly what I was dealing with. I moved as quietly as possible, keeping low. That's when I spotted the second one. This one was darker, almost black, and just as tall as the first. It was moving parallel to me about 70 yards away through a stand of aspens. The morning light filtered through the yellow leaves, casting a strange glow on its massive form. One of them, I think the first one, made a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a growl or a howl. It was a low, vibrating sound, almost like a rumble that you could feel more than hear. It seemed to be communicating with the other one. The second one stopped moving immediately after this sound. I realized they were coordinating, working together, and I was their focus. I abandoned my plan to reach the outcrop and decided to make for a small ravine instead, hoping the steep sides would force them to approach from only one direction if they followed. As I moved, I heard them adjust their positions. They weren't running, just walking with purpose, keeping pace. I reached the ravine and slid down into it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The sides were about 8 feet high, with a dried creek bed at the bottom. I moved along it for maybe 100 yards before coming to a spot where a fallen tree made a natural bridge across the top. As I looked up at this tree, planning my exit from the ravine, I froze. Standing not 30 yards away was one of them. It was just watching me. From this distance, I could see details I wish I could forget. Its body was massive, its chest and shoulders impossibly wide. The hair covering it was thick but uneven, thinner in spots. Its face was a dark grayish color with deep-set eyes under a pronounced brow ridge. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, awareness. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. It didn't make any aggressive moves. It just stood there, filling the space between two large pines, watching me. Then it slowly raised its head and made that rumbling sound again. From somewhere behind me, I heard the response, the same sound but slightly different in pitch. They were talking to each other, about me. I had my rifle, but the thought of shooting never even crossed my mind. Something told me that would be the worst possible decision. Instead, I backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact until I rounded a bend in the ravine. For the next 2 hours, I took a circuitous route back toward my camp. I'd move quickly for a while, then stop and listen. Sometimes I'd hear nothing. Other times I'd catch sounds of movement, always at a distance, always maintaining that perimeter around me. They were escorting me out. That's the only way I can describe it. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, I nearly cried with relief. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath. My campsite was just as I'd left it, but I didn't care about breaking it down properly. I grabbed my essential gear, threw it in the back of my truck, and left my tent standing. The whole time, I could feel them watching from the tree line. Not threatening, just observing. As I drove away, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Nothing followed, at least not that I could see. I've tried to rationalize what happened that day. Maybe they were bears walking on hind legs. Maybe it was other hunters playing an elaborate prank. But deep down, I know what I saw. 2 Sasquatches protecting their territory, making sure I understood I was the intruder. I've never gone back to that part of Flattops. Never will. I still hunt. But something changed in me that day. The wilderness doesn't feel the same anymore. When I'm in the woods now, I'm always listening for that rumbling sound, always wondering if I'm being watched. Sometimes at night, I still dream about those eyes, that intelligence, the way they worked together, like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly how to handle humans who wandered too far into their domain. I don't tell this story much. People either think I'm crazy or they want details I can't give. Did you take pictures? Why didn't you shoot one? How do you explain that in that moment none of that mattered? That all you wanted was to get away safely? All I know is what I experienced. 2 creatures, 8 to 9 feet tall, coordinating to escort me out of their territory. And the feeling that if they'd wanted to hurt me, they could have. Easily. I've read other accounts since then, other hunters with similar stories. It helps knowing I'm not alone, but it doesn't make it any easier to explain. Some things you just have to experience to understand. And trust me, this is one experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. Story 7. I've been debating whether to post this for years now. I'm not the type who goes looking for the paranormal or believes every story I read online. I'm just a regular guy who experienced something I still can't explain, and it's been eating at me for over 20 years. This happened on June 4th, 2001. I remember the date because it was the day after my 35th birthday, and I had taken the day off work to extend my birthday weekend. I live near Brookings, Oregon, and one of my favorite things about this area is the beaches. That evening, I decided to take my golden retriever Max for our usual walk along the beach north of town. It was around 6:30 in the evening when we arrived at the parking lot. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with that golden light you get a couple hours before sunset. The beach there is split by a small creek that runs down from the hills. South of the creek is the popular section where most people hang out, but north of it gets pretty isolated, with these massive boulders and thick brush that climbs up into steep hills. I'd been there dozens of times before and always enjoyed the solitude of the northern section. Max was excited as usual, pulling on his leash as we made our way down the trail to the sand. There were a few people on the southern section, mostly packing up to leave as evening approached. We walked for about 20 minutes along the shore, then crossed the shallow creek to the northern section. The water was only ankle deep and Max splashed through happily. Once we crossed to the northern side, we had the place completely to ourselves. I let Max off his leash since no one was around. Normally, he'd run ahead, exploring the driftwood and splashing in the surf, but he stayed unusually close to me. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just tired. We continued north along the beach for another 10 minutes or so. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows from the boulders scattered across the sand. The brush and trees that ran up the hillside to our right were getting darker, creating this wall of deep shadow. It was still perfectly bright on the beach itself, but the contrast was growing stronger by the minute. That's when Max suddenly stopped walking, and I don't mean he slowed down. He literally froze mid-step, like someone had hit a pause button. His ears perked straight up, and his body went rigid. I've never seen him do that before. "What's up, buddy?" I asked, looking around for whatever caught his attention. I figured maybe there was a seal on the rocks, or some birds he spotted, but he wouldn't move. I tugged gently on his collar, trying to encourage him forward, but he planted his feet and refused to budge. Then I noticed he was staring intently toward the brush line at the base of the hills, about 50 yards away. I squinted in that direction, but couldn't see anything unusual, just the typical thick salal bushes and shore pines. But Max was locked on something, and a low growl started vibrating in his chest. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Max is the friendliest dog I've ever owned. He loves everyone and everything. I'd never heard him growl like that before, not at other dogs, not at strangers, not even that time we encountered a black bear on a hiking trail the previous summer. "Okay, buddy," I said, clipping his leash back on. "Let's head back." We turned around and started walking south again. Max kept looking over his shoulder, and I found myself doing the same. There was this heaviness in the air that's hard to describe, like the atmosphere itself had thickened. The sounds of the waves suddenly seemed muted, and I became hyper-aware of every snapping twig or rustling leaf from the direction of the hillside. We picked up our pace. By the time we reached the creek again, I was walking so fast that Max had to trot to keep up. We crossed back to the southern section, which was now completely empty of other people. The sun was lower, about an hour from setting, and the light had that intense golden orange quality that happens on clear evenings at the coast. Instead of continuing along the beach, I decided to take the trail that winds up to the parking lot. It follows along the base of the hills for about a quarter mile before climbing up to where the cars park. As we started up this trail, I felt somewhat relieved to be heading back to civilization, even though a part of me felt silly for being spooked by nothing. That's when I glanced toward the northern hillside, the one we'd just left behind. I stopped dead in my tracks. About 200 yards away, moving diagonally across the slope of the hill, were two figures. At first, I thought they were hikers. Very large hikers wearing dark clothing, but as I focused on them, several things registered all at once that made my blood run cold. First, they were massive, much taller than any person I'd ever seen. 7 feet at minimum, maybe closer to 8. Second, they weren't wearing clothing. What I initially took for black garments was actually dark hair covering their entire bodies. Third, the way they moved was wrong. They had this hunched posture, with incredibly long arms that hung low and swung heavily as they walked. The movement reminded me of gorillas I'd seen at the zoo, but these things were much, much larger. I stood frozen, watching them traverse the hillside. They were moving with purpose, following some kind of game trail that cut across the slope. Their strides were long and deliberate, covering ground with unsettling efficiency. In the fading light, I couldn't make out distinct facial features, but their heads seemed oddly proportioned, conical almost, with no visible neck. Max was trembling against my leg. He wasn't growling anymore. He was dead silent, pressing himself against me like he was trying to disappear. I unconsciously tightened my grip on his leash until my knuckles went white. Then, as if sensing they were being watched, both figures suddenly stopped. The one in front slowly turned its upper body toward us. Even at that distance, I felt the weight of its gaze like a physical thing. We stared at each other across the expanse, and in that moment, I was absolutely certain that whatever these things were, they weren't human. The one that had turned toward us made a motion to the other, and they changed direction. They began moving in a way that would intersect with the trail ahead of us if we continued upward. That was all the motivation I needed. "Come on," I whispered to Max, and we started moving quickly up the trail toward the parking lot. I didn't run. Something instinctual told me not to make sudden movements. But I walked as fast as I possibly could without breaking into a jog. The trail curved around a large outcropping of rock, temporarily blocking my view of the hillside. When we emerged on the other side, I couldn't see the figures anymore, which somehow felt worse than seeing them. Were they still coming? Had they picked up their pace? Every rustle of branches in the light breeze made me flinch. About halfway to my car, there's a small clearing in the brush beside the trail. As we passed it, movement caught my eye, and I jerked my head to look. There, standing perfectly still among the salal bushes, was a large doe. Under normal circumstances, I would have been delighted by the wildlife sighting, but this deer looked wrong. She was standing rigidly, her head high and ears forward, nostrils flaring. She was staring in exactly the same direction we had come from, and her entire body was trembling visibly. In that moment, seeing that animal's obvious terror, any doubts I had about what I'd seen vanished. Whatever was out there had this wild animal just as spooked as we were. I practically dragged Max the rest of the way to the parking lot. My dark green Chevy Blazer was the only vehicle left. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. I lifted Max into the passenger seat, something I never do because he's perfectly capable of jumping in himself, but I wasn't taking any chances with delays. As I started the engine, I looked in my rearview mirror. The trail we'd just come up was empty, but the shadows between the trees seemed to shift and move in ways that shadows shouldn't. I threw the Blazer into reverse, spun around, and got onto the main road as quickly as I could. I kept checking my mirrors all the way home, half expecting to see something massive and dark loping after us. My mind was racing through possible explanations. Bears. No, bears don't walk on 2 legs for extended periods. Hunters in ghillie suits, at that size, moving like that? No way. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows, then sat on my couch with Max pressed against me, still trembling. I didn't sleep at all that night, Every sound outside made me tense up. Max refused to leave my side even to eat. The next morning, after the sun was fully up, I convinced myself to drive back to that beach. In the bright daylight with other people around, I felt braver. I walked the same trail, looking for tracks or signs of something large having passed through the brush. I found nothing conclusive, just some broken branches and what might have been very large footprints partially washed away by the morning tide. I've spent years researching what I might have seen. The Pacific Northwest has a long history of Bigfoot sightings, but I'd always dismissed those as folklore or misidentifications. Now I'm not so sure. What I saw moved with intelligence and purpose. They were aware of us, and they changed their behavior when they noticed us watching them. I've never gone back to that northern section of beach. Max refused to even get out of the car when I tried to take him to the southern section a few weeks later. He knew something I didn't, something he sensed before I ever saw those creatures. I still live in the same area, and I still hike and explore the outdoors. But I'm different now. I'm constantly aware of what might be watching from the tree line. I pay attention when animals go quiet or act strangely, and I never ever stay out in the woods after sunset. I don't know what those things were. I don't have proof. All I know is what I saw, and that 22 years later, I still get chills thinking about those massive, hair-covered figures moving across the hillside, and the moment when one of them turned and looked directly at me. This is Story 8. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my family. Even among those who were there that night, we barely ever mentioned it again. But it's been over 40 years now, and I still can't shake what we saw. It was July 4th, 1979. I was 23 then, married to my wife Susan for just under 2 years. We were celebrating Independence Day at my in-laws' farmhouse in rural Nebraska. The place was about 15 miles outside of Lincoln, surrounded by cornfields, soybean fields, and not much else. My father-in-law, Frank, had owned that land for nearly 30 years, and I always loved visiting. It was peaceful out there, usually. We had a big gathering that day. Must have been 14 or 15 of us altogether. Susan's parents, her 3 siblings with their spouses, a couple of cousins, and some neighbors from down the road. The kind of gathering where everyone brings a dish and you end up with way too much potato salad and baked beans. The day had gone perfectly. Weather in the mid-80s, clear blue sky, just enough of a breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. We spent the afternoon playing horseshoes, grilling burgers, and drinking Coors. Frank had set up a volleyball net in the backyard, and we played until our arms were sore. As the sun went down, we lit off fireworks. Nothing fancy, just some bottle rockets and Roman candles the kids enjoyed. By around 11 that night, the official fireworks were over. We were all sitting on the back patio, some in lawn chairs, some on the steps, drinking and talking. The patio faced south, away from the main road, looking out over an open area that stretched maybe 50 yards to a highway. Beyond the highway was a massive soybean field owned by another farmer. It was a clear night with a nearly full moon, so we could see pretty far across that field. The moonlight made the soybeans look silvery, almost like water rippling when the breeze hit them. We'd been sitting there maybe 20 minutes when Jerry, Susan's brother-in-law, suddenly jumped up from his chair. "What the hell is that?" he said, pointing across the highway toward the soybean field. At first, I didn't see anything, but then everyone started getting up, moving to the edge of the patio, and that's when I saw it too. Something was moving through the field, about 300 yards away. Even from that distance, I could tell it was big, really big. It was walking upright, but with this weird forward-leaning posture like it was perpetually about to fall forward. Its arms were long, swinging heavily at its sides as it moved. "Is that a person?" my mother-in-law asked, her voice tight. It wasn't a person. I've never seen a person that big or that moved that way. It was striding through the crops with these long, powerful steps, moving fast, too fast for something that size. I'd guess it was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Hard to tell from that distance, but its proportions were all wrong for a human. Maybe it's a bear, someone suggested. But we all knew bears didn't walk through soybean fields on 2 legs like that, not for that long, and not with that gait. Nobody said anything for maybe 30 seconds. We just watched as this thing moved across the field from east to west. It never slowed down, never seemed to notice us. It just kept that steady, purposeful stride. Then it disappeared behind a small hill at the edge of the field, where the soybeans met a line of dense woods. The moment it was out of sight, everyone started talking at once. Some people were saying it had to be a person, maybe a hunter or a trespasser. Others thought it might be some kind of large animal. My father-in-law kept squinting across the field, not saying much. I turned to my brother-in-law, Dave. We should go check it out. Dave nodded immediately. He was always up for anything, especially after a few beers. "Let's take Dad's truck," he said. Frank had this old Chevy 4x4 with spotlights mounted on the roll bar. Frank didn't object when we told him our plan. He just handed Dave the keys and said, "Be careful," in a way that made me think he wasn't sure what we'd find out there. So Dave and I climbed into the truck and drove down the driveway to the highway. We crossed over and found a dirt access road that ran along the edge of the soybean field. The headlights illuminated the crops, creating these long shadows that seemed to move and shift as we bounced along the uneven path. Over there, Dave pointed to where we'd seen the figure disappear. We drove slowly, following the narrow trail that circled the field. I kept my eyes on the woods, half expecting whatever it was to come charging out at us. When we reached the area where the thing had headed into the trees, Dave stopped the truck and switched on the spotlights. Their bright beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the edge of the field where it met the woods. "Look at that," I said, pointing. There was a barbed wire fence separating the field from the forest, but something had clearly crossed through it. The ground was torn up, the plants flattened in a path about 3 feet wide. We could see broken soybean stalks and these deep impressions in the soil, not distinct footprints, but depressions that suggested something heavy had passed through. Dave put the truck in park, and we sat there for a moment, the engine idling. "Should we get out and look?" he asked. I wasn't eager to leave the safety of the truck, but my curiosity was getting the better of me. "Yeah, but let's stay close to the vehicle." We got out, leaving the engine running and the headlights on. The night had gone quiet. No crickets chirping, no frogs croaking. Just the low rumble of the truck's engine and our footsteps as we approached the fence. The damage was even more obvious up close. Something had pushed through the barbed wire, bending it downward but not breaking it. The wire was still intact, just stretched and distorted. Beyond the fence, we could see where vegetation had been crushed, creating a path leading into the woods. Dave picked up a stick and poked at one of the depressions in the ground. "That's deep," he said. "Whatever made this was heavy." I shined my flashlight along the tree line, trying to see if anything was watching us from the darkness. The beam caught nothing but leaves and branches, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. "Let's try the spotlights," I suggested. Dave went back to the truck and adjusted the mounted spots, aiming them directly at the woods. Their powerful beams cut through the first few yards of trees, but beyond that was just darkness. That's when I noticed something strange about the woods themselves. This area was only a few miles from an old World War II military base that had been decommissioned years ago. There were rumors about underground bunkers and storage facilities scattered throughout these woods. Looking at the trees now, they seemed almost too uniformly spaced in some areas, like they'd been planted to conceal something. "Dave," I called, "you remember those old bunkers people talk about out here?" He nodded, coming back to stand beside me. "Yeah, Dad says they used to store munitions out here during the war. Some of those bunkers go deep underground." The thought of whatever we'd seen disappearing into an abandoned military bunker made my skin crawl. I was about to suggest we head back when we heard it. A deep, throaty sound from somewhere in the woods. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt. Something in between that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "Time to go," Dave said, already backing toward the truck. I didn't argue. We both got back in the vehicle, and Dave threw it in reverse, backing up fast enough to throw dirt. He spun the truck around, and we headed back toward the farmhouse. As we drove, I kept looking in the side mirror, half expecting to see something massive emerge from the trees and chase after us, but the road behind remained empty. When we got back to the house, everyone was still on the patio waiting for us. They bombarded us with questions as soon as we stepped out of the truck. "Did you see it? What was it? Was it still there?" We told them what we'd found: the disturbed fence, the flattened path, the strange sound we'd heard. Some people looked frightened, others skeptical. My father-in-law listened quietly, nodding occasionally. "Could have been a moose," one of the neighbors suggested. "They get big." "There aren't any moose in Nebraska," someone else countered. "Maybe it escaped from somewhere," another person offered. "Like a zoo or something." The theories continued as we moved inside. It was getting late, and the initial excitement was giving way to fatigue. People started heading to bed or preparing to drive home, but there was this strange tension in the air, like no one wanted to be the last one outside. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old farmhouse had me sitting up, straining to hear. Susan slept soundly beside me, but I kept replaying what I'd seen in my mind. That large figure moving with such purpose across the field, its long arms swinging. I couldn't reconcile it with any animal I knew. The weird thing is, after that night, none of us ever really talked about it again. It was like we collectively decided to forget what had happened. When we gathered for Thanksgiving that year, no one mentioned the 4th of July incident. By Christmas, it was as if it had never occurred. A few years later, Frank and my mother-in-law sold the farmhouse and moved into town. They said it was because the place was too big for just the two of them now that all the kids were grown. But I always wondered if there was more to it. I never asked if they'd seen anything else after that night. Something told me they wouldn't have told me if they had. I've spent years trying to make sense of what we saw. I've read about bear sightings, escaped exotic pets, even about people who live off the grid. None of it matches what I witnessed. Sometimes I wonder if it had something to do with those old military bunkers, if maybe the government was conducting some kind of experiment out there. But deep down, I know what I saw wasn't human. It moved too fluidly, too powerfully through that field, and sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I find myself thinking about those woods and wondering if it's still out there, whatever it was. I've never been back to that part of Nebraska. I tell myself it's because there's no reason to go, but the truth is, I'm not sure I want to know if it's still there. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. But I know what I saw that 4th of July in '79, and so did 14 other people, even if none of us ever talked about it again. Story 9. I still get chills when I think about that night. It's been almost 2 months now, but I can't stop replaying those few seconds in my head over and over again. I'm not the type of person who believes in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. At least I wasn't before October 14th, 2024. I work as a sales rep for a farming equipment company based in Madison, and I spend a lot of time on the road visiting clients throughout Wisconsin. That day I had meetings that ran late in the southwestern part of the state, so I was driving back home well after dark. It was around 10:30 at night, and I was on this 2-lane highway cutting through farmland in south-central Wisconsin. You know those roads, nothing but fields on both sides, the occasional farmhouse light way off in the distance, and absolutely no streetlights. The sky was clear that night, but there was no moon, which made it feel especially dark. I remember thinking how isolated it felt out there. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station that was starting to get staticky as I got farther from town. My headlights carved out the only visible slice of the world ahead of me. I was tired but alert, focused on getting home to my empty apartment after a long day. I'd been on that stretch of highway maybe 10 minutes when it happened. I wasn't speeding, probably going about 55 miles per hour, when something massive suddenly appeared at the edge of my headlights on the right side of the road. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was just this huge dark shape, and then it leaped onto the road. I mean, leaped, not walked, not shuffled. This thing bounded onto the asphalt with such power that I could almost feel the impact through my car, though I know that's impossible from that distance. It landed in this weird posture, legs spread wide apart, arms swinging, and its upper body leaning forward almost horizontally. It's hard to describe exactly, but it wasn't standing upright like a person would. It was in this athletic, powerful stance. I instinctively hit the brakes. Though I wasn't in danger of hitting it, it was maybe 40 yards ahead when I first spotted it. The thing is, it crossed that entire road in just 2 bounds. 2. Do you understand how impossible that is? A 2-lane highway isn't narrow, and this thing cleared it in 2 massive strides. My headlights lit it up completely during those brief seconds. It was covered in this black hair that looked almost shiny in the light. Not matted or dirty like you might expect from an animal living in the wild. It was sleek, almost like it was wet, though I don't think it actually was. The size of this thing is what I still can't wrap my head around. Even in that hunched-over posture, its back was nearly as high as my windshield. I drive a Toyota Camry, so we're talking about something that would tower over my car if it stood upright. But it wasn't just the height, it was the width of this thing. Its shoulders and upper body looked like they nearly filled the entire lane. I remember thinking it was almost as wide as the front of my car. How is that even possible? As it reached the left side of the road, the thing did something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It turned its head, just its head, not its whole body, and looked directly back at me. I couldn't make out facial features clearly at that distance and in those conditions, but I felt its eyes on me. It was a deliberate look, not some animal's reflexive glance. It knew I was there, and it wanted me to know that it knew. Then it was gone, vanishing into the darkness of the field on the left side of the road. The whole encounter lasted maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds that have completely messed with my understanding of reality. I sat there with my foot on the brake, just frozen for I don't know how long, maybe 30 seconds, a minute. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I had this cold sweat breaking out all over my body. Eventually, a car appeared in my rearview mirror, snapping me back to reality. I hit the gas and kept driving, but I couldn't stop looking at the spot where it had disappeared. Part of me wanted to pull over and investigate, but a much bigger part of me was terrified of what I might find. I called my buddy Mike as soon as I had enough signal, around 11:15 when I got closer to Madison. He thought I was messing with him at first, then suggested it was probably just a bear, but I've seen bears. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. They don't have that kind of stride, that kind of speed, or that kind of build. And bears definitely don't deliberately turn to look at you in that way. When I got home, I immediately started searching online for any reports of similar sightings in the area. I found a few vague stories from over the years, people claiming to have seen something big and hairy in the woods, unusual footprints, strange noises at night. Nothing recent, and nothing that matched exactly what I'd seen. I debated whether to report it. To who, though? The police. "Hello, officer. I'd like to report a Bigfoot sighting." Yeah, right. I could just imagine how that conversation would go. I thought about contacting one of those cryptozoology groups, but I didn't want to become some kind of joke or have my name associated with this forever. I still have to work in this state after all. So I kept it to myself mostly. Told Mike and my sister, both of whom listened politely but clearly didn't believe me. I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe me either. But here's the thing. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a moose. We don't even have moose in that part of Wisconsin. It wasn't a guy in a costume who would be out there in the middle of nowhere just waiting to jump across a road at night. And it moved with a purpose and awareness that no animal I've ever seen possesses. The details keep coming back to me in flashes, the way its arms swung as it moved, longer than they should be, with hands that seemed to hang below its knees, the slight shimmer of its black hair in my headlights, the fluidity of its movement, despite its massive size, the way it turned just its head without repositioning its body like an owl might do. The impression of raw power in every aspect of its physiology. I've gone back to that stretch of highway twice since then, during daylight hours. The first time was the very next day. I pulled over approximately where I thought the encounter happened and walked along the roadside, looking for tracks or hair or any evidence. Nothing, just trampled grass and weeds at the edge of a harvested cornfield. No giant footprints, no broken branches, nothing that would confirm what I saw. I went back again a week later and ventured a little farther into the field. Still nothing conclusive. Just an ordinary stretch of rural highway that now feels anything but ordinary to me. I've had trouble sleeping since that night. I keep seeing that head turn, those eyes looking back at me. I find myself staring out the windows of my apartment at night, wondering what else might be out there that we don't understand. I've started keeping my blinds closed, which I never used to do. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to explain it away. Maybe it was some kind of weird shadow or optical illusion caused by fatigue. Maybe my headlights played tricks on me. Maybe there was fog I didn't notice that distorted something ordinary into something extraordinary. But then I remember how solid it was, how it moved with weight and mass across that road, how it deliberately looked back at me. This wasn't a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. This was a physical being that existed in the same space as me for those few seconds. I've always been skeptical about Bigfoot stories. I thought they were just myths or misidentifications or outright hoaxes. Now, I don't know what to think. I'm not saying I definitely saw Bigfoot that night. I'm just saying I saw something that I cannot explain. Within my understanding of what animals exist in Wisconsin, the weirdest part. Since that night, I felt like I'm being watched sometimes, especially when I'm driving on rural roads after dark. It's probably just paranoia, my brain playing tricks on me after such a shocking experience. But sometimes I'll get this prickly feeling on the back of my neck, and I'll check my mirrors more frequently, scanning the tree line and the ditches alongside the road. I've started taking the interstate more, even when it adds time to my trips. I tell myself it's for efficiency, but really, I'm avoiding those dark two-lane highways through the countryside. I used to love the solitude of those drives. Now, they make me nervous in a way I can't quite shake. I don't know what I'm looking for by sharing this. Validation, explanations, similar experiences. I just know that I needed to get it out of my system somehow, and writing it down feels like at least acknowledging to myself that it really happened. Whatever I saw that night in October doesn't fit into the world as I understood it before. It was too big, too fast, too intentional. And now I drive with one eye on the road and one eye on the shadows beside it, wondering if I'll ever see it again, and terrified that I might. The worst part is not knowing what exactly I saw, not knowing if anyone will ever believe me, not knowing if it's still out there, watching from the darkness as we all drive by, completely unaware. Sometimes I think about how many other people might have seen something similar but stayed quiet out of fear of ridicule. How many sightings go unreported? How many encounters happen with no witnesses at all? All I know for sure is that on a dark highway in Wisconsin on October 14th, 2024, something impossible crossed my path, and nothing has felt quite the same since. At Story 10, I don't talk about this much, When I do, people look at me like I'm crazy or making it all up for attention, but I swear on my badge and everything I hold sacred that what I'm about to share really happened back in '75. I was a sergeant with the tribal police on the Wumi reservation. Been on the force about 8 years at that point. Good record, respected in the community. I wasn't some rookie who'd jump at shadows or make up stories. I'd seen plenty in my time: domestic disputes, drunk drivers, occasional break-ins, normal stuff you'd expect. It was mid-October, getting cold at night, the kind of weather where frost forms by morning and your breath makes little clouds in the beam of your flashlight. I was working the night shift when the call came in around 11:30. Emma Smith, a respected elder, 78 years old and sharp as a tack, reported something trying to break into her house. Now, Emma wasn't the type to call unless something was genuinely wrong. She lived alone in a small house near the edge of the reservation, where the pine forest gets thick. When dispatch relayed her call, they said she was claiming a Bigfoot was trying to get in. I'll admit, I sighed a bit. We'd had a few Bigfoot stories circulating on the res recently, but I figured it was probably a bear or someone's dog. Still, I headed out there right away. The drive took about 20 minutes down the main road and then onto the dirt path leading to her place. My headlights caught the reflective eyes of deer twice on the way. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in this pale blue light that made the forest look different, deeper somehow. When I pulled up, Emma was waiting on her porch with a shotgun. That alone told me she was genuinely scared. She might have been elderly, but she wasn't frail or fearful by nature. "Ken," she said when I approached. She always called me by my first name, had known me since I was a kid. It was right here trying to get in the back door. Biggest thing I've ever seen. I nodded, trying to look reassuring while I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. "Let me take a look around, Emma. Stay inside, okay?" She nodded but didn't look convinced I was taking her seriously. "It wasn't no bear, Ken. I've seen bears. This stood on 2 legs the whole time. Had a face. Almost like a person, but not. I checked the back door first. The wooden frame was damaged, like something had been pulling or pushing on it with considerable force. There were scratches too, but not like bear claws. More like something with fingers had been grabbing at the wood. I found similar damage on her smokehouse about 30 yards from the main house. Boards pulled loose, the small door hanging off its hinges. I spent about an hour searching the property, but found no clear tracks in the hard-packed dirt around her place. I told Emma I'd increase patrols in the area and asked her to call immediately if anything returned. I offered to stay, but she insisted she'd be fine with her shotgun and said her nephew was coming to stay the night. I headed back to the station to file my report, figuring that would be the end of it. Maybe a particularly bold bear, I thought, but I couldn't explain away that feeling I had looking at those doors, like something with hands had been trying to get in. Around 2:30 in the morning, my radio crackled. It was Emma again, her voice tight with fear. "It's back, Ken, and there's more of them." I hit the lights and drove way too fast down those dark roads. When I pulled up this time, I immediately noticed something was different. There were 3 trucks parked in Emma's yard, and a group of people, maybe 7 in total, were standing in a semicircle at the edge of her property, all pointing flashlights and what looked like hunting spotlights into the tree line. I grabbed my shotgun and approached quickly. That's when I saw it. Standing just at the edge of the clearing was something. Even now, 40+ years later, I struggle to describe it in a way that doesn't sound insane. It was tall, 7.5 feet at least, covered in dark hair or fur that looked matted in places. It stood completely upright on 2 legs. The spotlights were hitting it directly, and it had one massive arm raised like it was shielding its eyes. My first thought, the rational part of my brain desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing, was that it must be someone in a costume, some kind of prank. But as I got closer, that explanation fell apart completely. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. The arms hung too low, reaching almost to its knees. The shoulders were impossibly broad, and the way it moved, a subtle shifting of weight from one foot to another, had a fluidity that no costume could replicate. "Everyone stay back," I called out, raising my shotgun to my shoulder. I was shaking so bad I'm not sure I could have hit anything if I'd tried. This could be someone in a costume. This could be dangerous. One of the men, Emma's nephew Tyler, laughed nervously. "That ain't no costume, Sergeant Cooper." The creature seemed to react to our voices. It lowered its arms slightly, and I got a better look at its face. That's the part that still haunts me. It wasn't a mask. The features moved, nostrils flaring, jaw shifting. The eyes reflected the spotlight with a reddish glow, but they were unmistakably eyes, tracking our movements with intelligence. When I pointed my shotgun more directly at it, the creature slowly, deliberately crouched lower, as if making itself a smaller target. That calculated response sent ice through my veins. Whatever this was, it understood weapons. It understood threat. For what felt like hours, but was probably about 20 minutes, we stood in this bizarre standoff. Nobody spoke much. The creature didn't advance or retreat, just watched us from that crouched position at the tree line. I was trying to figure out what the hell to do next when we heard it. From the forest behind, the creature came a series of sounds that turned my blood to ice. Wood knocking against wood. 3 distinct knocks, then silence, then 3 more. Then, from a different direction, what I can only describe as a scream, not quite human, not quite animal. It started low and rose to a pitch that made the hair on my neck stand up. The creature in front of us turned its head slightly toward the sounds, but maintained its position. That's when Tyler whispered, "There's more of them out there." Almost simultaneously, we heard movement in the underbrush. Heavy footsteps circling around to our left, trying to flank our position. The creature we could see was just keeping our attention fixed forward. "Everyone back to the house," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now, slow and steady." We began retreating, our lights still trained on the creature. It made no move to follow us until we were about halfway to Emma's house. Then it simply stood up to its full height, let out a deep, rumbling sound from its chest, and melted back into the forest with shocking silence for something so large. We spent the rest of the night in Emma's house, lights on, weapons ready. Nobody slept. We heard occasional knocking sounds, and once something heavy walked across her porch, making the old boards creak, but nothing tried to break in again. When dawn finally came, I went outside to check the area. The ground had frosted overnight, and there in the clearing where the creature had stood were footprints. Not bear tracks, not human tracks. Footprints about 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes pressed deep into the frost-covered ground. I followed them to the tree line before they disappeared into the harder terrain of the forest. I took photos with the camera I kept in my patrol car, though they didn't come out very clear. Over the next several weeks, the tribal police received more than 100 reports of sightings across the reservation. I personally responded to dozens and encountered what I believe were the same creatures 2 more times, once at a distance across a small canyon, and once at night on a remote road when one crossed in front of my patrol car. The tribal council eventually held a closed meeting about the situation. Some of the elders spoke of old stories, legends about tall beings that lived in the mountains and occasionally came down to the forests surrounding our lands. They had names for them in our language, names that translated roughly to the tall people or the forest people. According to them, these encounters happened in cycles, every few generations, usually during particularly harsh winters or times of change. After about 2 months, the sightings stopped almost as suddenly as they'd begun. Life returned to normal. The official report I filed mentioned potential bear activity and unidentified trespassers, because what else could I put in an official document? Bigfoot family decided to visit the reservation. I'd have lost my job, but I know what I saw. I know that was no man in a costume, no bear standing upright. The intelligence in those eyes, the coordinated way they moved through the forest and surrounded us, that was something else entirely. I've kept the photos I took, though they've faded badly over the years. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, reminding myself it really happened. Most people I've told think I'm spinning tales or that my memory has warped over time. Maybe that's easier to believe, but I was there that night. I saw it with my own eyes, standing in that spotlight, watching us with what I can only describe as cautious curiosity. And sometimes, when I'm driving through remote areas of the reservation at night, I still find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if they're still out there, watching and waiting in the darkness. Story 11. I still can't sleep right, and it's been 3 weeks. My dogs keep waking me up, especially Max, who keeps staring at the back door like he's waiting for something to come back. I guess I should start from the beginning. It was just a regular Tuesday evening last month, nothing special. I was sprawled on my couch watching some mindless reality show. One of those home renovation things where they tear everything apart and magically fix it in 30 minutes. My 2 Yorkies, Max and Bella, were curled up next to me. Max is 4, Bella's 6, and they're the closest thing I have to kids, my little protectors, even though they're barely 7 pounds each. I remember it was around 8:30. The sun had just set, and that weird twilight was happening where it's not quite dark yet, but not light either. I had just grabbed the remote to change the channel when Max's head suddenly jerked up. His ears went straight back, not forward like when he hears the mailman or something normal. Back, pressed against his head. At first, I thought maybe he heard a raccoon. We get them sometimes, digging through my trash cans. But then he made this sound I'd never heard before. Not a bark or a growl, almost like a whimper, but desperate. His whole body went rigid. Bella picked up on it too and started pacing nervously on the couch. That's when I noticed movement through my sliding glass door, just a flash of something dark passing by. My first thought was, oh great, some guy is in my backyard. I live alone, and even though my neighborhood isn't bad, you hear stories, you know? But then, whatever it was, moved past the door again, and my stomach just dropped. This wasn't a person. I was sitting on my couch, which is about 15 feet from my back door. The door is glass from top to bottom. From where I was sitting, I should only be able to see someone's legs and torso if they're walking by. But I could see shoulders and the top of a head moving fast. Let me make this clear, my fence is 6 feet tall. This thing was towering over it. Max went absolutely nuts. He leapt off the couch and tore across the living room toward the back door, barking his head off. Bella followed him, but she stayed a few feet back, just yapping and running in circles. I didn't move at first. I literally couldn't. I just sat there, frozen, watching this massive dark shape move alongside my house. It was so fluid, so fast, too fast for something that big. When I finally got up, my legs felt like jelly. I'm not usually scared of much. I've gone camping alone. I've hiked remote trails, but something about this felt fundamentally wrong, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. I called the dogs back, but Max was determined to get to the door. He's never aggressive, but he was absolutely losing it, scratching at the glass, his bark becoming more frantic. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and slowly made my way to the door. I don't know why I didn't turn on the porch light. Maybe part of me didn't want to see it clearly. I know that sounds stupid now. By the time I reached the door, whatever it was had moved out of view. I cupped my hands around my eyes and pressed my face against the glass, trying to see out into the darkness. Nothing. Max was still going crazy, jumping up against the glass, spinning in circles, then back to jumping. I remember thinking, he sees something I don't. I don't know what possessed me, but I slid the door open just a crack. The night air rushed in, and with it came this smell. Not like a skunk or anything animal-like I'd encountered before. It was musky and thick, almost like wet fur mixed with something rotting, but earthier. "Hello?" I called out, feeling immediately stupid, like whatever that thing was would answer me. Silence. Even the usual night sounds, crickets, distant traffic, seemed muted. I closed and locked the door, then flipped on the porch light. My backyard lit up, looking completely normal. My patio furniture, my little herb garden, the bird feeder I'd hung last summer, everything was in its place. But Max wouldn't calm down. He kept running between the back door and the side window, whining and barking. I grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer and, against my better judgment, decided to check outside. I know, classic horror movie mistake. But this is real life, and I needed to know if someone or something was lurking around my house. I went out the front door, locked it behind me, and made a wide circle around to my backyard gate. The whole time, I kept the flashlight beam sweeping across the ground, the bushes everywhere. The gate was still locked from the outside. This is what really got to me. Whatever I saw, this massive dark thing moving alongside my house, had either jumped my fence or I don't know, but it hadn't used the gate. I unlocked it and stepped into my backyard, sweeping the flashlight around. Nothing seemed disturbed. I walked the perimeter, checking the fence line. No holes, no damage. Everything was intact, but then I noticed something on the ground near where I'd first seen the movement. Using my flashlight, I bent down to look closer. The grass was flattened, not just in a small patch like an animal might make, but in two large oblong impressions, like footprints, except each one was easily twice the size of my foot, and I wear a size 8. I took a picture with my phone, but it didn't really show up well in the dark. Just looked like shadows on grass. As I was crouched there, examining the ground, I got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. It was like a physical pressure on the back of my neck. Every hair on my body stood up, and I broke out in goosebumps despite the warm evening. I turned slowly, shining my flashlight toward the tree line that backs up to my property about 50 yards away. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like when you know someone's staring at you in a crowded room, that sixth sense that makes you turn around. I hurried back inside, double-checking every lock. Max and Bella were still on high alert, pacing around the house, stopping to bark at the windows occasionally. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a bear, but we don't have bears in this area. A really tall person. But the way it moved was all wrong. Too fluid, too fast, and that doesn't explain how it got over my fence without opening the gate or breaking anything. I ended up calling my neighbor, Tom. He's lived here forever and knows everything about the area. He came over with his shotgun, which freaked me out almost as much as what I'd seen, and we walked the property together. He didn't find anything except those same flattened areas in the grass that I'd noticed. "Probably just kids," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. He offered to stay for a while, but I said I was fine. I wasn't. That night I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. The dogs wouldn't settle either. They kept going to the windows, looking out, then coming back to bed, only to repeat the process 20 minutes later. I've been sleeping with all the lights on since then. I installed security cameras the next day, and motion detector lights all around the house. Maybe overkill, but I can't shake what I saw. The thing is, this wasn't actually my first experience with something unexplainable. Back in 1999, I was hiking with my dad in the mountains about 2 hours from here. We were on this remote trail, hadn't seen another person all day. We stopped for lunch by a stream, and while my dad was setting up our little camp stove, I wandered a bit upstream. I remember finding this perfect skipping stone and looking up to show my dad, but he was too far away, and that's when I saw it, just for a second, crossing between two trees on the other side of the stream. Huge, dark, walking on two legs but hunched over. My 13-year-old brain couldn't process it. I dropped the rock and ran back to my dad, babbling about a monster. He laughed it off, said it was probably just a black bear standing on its hind legs. But I knew what I saw. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk on two legs for more than a few steps. This thing moved like a person, just bigger, much bigger. I buried that memory for years, convinced myself my dad was right, until now. Whatever was in my backyard 3 weeks ago brought it all rushing back. The same dark silhouette, the same fluid movement, the same feeling of absolute wrongness. I've been researching like crazy since then. There are so many stories online about similar sightings. People seeing large, hairy bipedal creatures in wooded areas all over the country. Most people call it Bigfoot, but that name seems almost silly compared to what I experienced. This wasn't some cartoon character. This was real, and it was terrifying. I've found online communities where people share their experiences, and so many details match what I saw. The height, the movement, even the smell. Some people talk about feeling watched in the woods, about that same pressure I felt in my backyard. The cameras haven't caught anything unusual yet, but sometimes they glitch at night. Just for a few seconds, the feed freezes or goes black. The company says it's probably just connectivity issues, but it always happens around the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning. Last night, Max woke me up around 2:30, whining and pawing at my bedroom door. When I let him out, he ran straight to the back door and stood there, staring out into the darkness, completely still. Bella wouldn't even leave my bedroom. I checked the cameras. Nothing. But when I went to the door, that smell was there again, faint but unmistakable. And even though I couldn't see anything, I knew it was out there, watching, waiting. For what? I don't know. I check that part of my yard every single evening now before I lock up for the night. I've started keeping a baseball bat by my bed. I've thought about moving, but where would I go? If these things are out there, they're probably everywhere. There's woods or wilderness. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it wants. I just know what I saw was real, and it wasn't human. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and dark, I swear I can hear something moving outside, circling, like it's trying to find a way in. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to me back in June of '88, while camping alone in the eastern Sierras. It's been over 30 years, but I remember every detail like it was yesterday. I've never really told the full story to anyone except my wife, but after finding this community and reading similar experiences, I feel like maybe someone here will actually believe me. I was 26 at the time, an experienced camper and hiker. I'd found this beautiful, secluded spot along a creek about 3 miles from the nearest road, far enough to feel like I had the wilderness to myself, but not so remote that I'd be completely screwed if something went wrong. The area had scattered pines, a small meadow, and this perfect little clearing right near the water. About 200 yards away was an old, abandoned corral from when ranchers used to graze cattle up there decades ago. That night started off perfectly normal. I'd set up my tent, cooked some freeze-dried lasagna on my portable stove, and was just relaxing outside with my shortwave radio. I liked to scan frequencies and see what I could pick up from around the world. Kind of a hobby of mine back then. It was around 9 in the evening, still light enough to see without a flashlight, but the sun had dropped behind the mountains. I remember feeling completely at peace. The radio was tuned to some station from Eastern Europe, and I was sipping on a little whiskey I'd brought along, just enough to take the edge off after a long day of hiking. The temperature was perfect, maybe 60 degrees, with this gentle breeze coming up from the creek. I could hear the water flowing over the rocks, and occasionally a bird would call out. Then everything changed in an instant. This scream cut through the air. I've tried for years to describe it properly, but words just don't do it justice. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard either. It started low and then went impossibly high. This guttural howl that turned into something that sounded almost like words, but weren't. It was loud. God, it was so loud. and close, maybe 100 feet away, just beyond where I could see in the tree line. Every hair on my body stood straight up. My stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster. The whiskey in my hand spilled because I was suddenly shaking so badly. That scream triggered something primal in me, pure, instinctual fear. For a few seconds, I just sat there frozen. My brain was trying to catalog what could make a sound like that. Bear, mountain lion, wolf, none of them fit. Bears make this huffing, woofing sound when they're angry. Mountain lions sound like a woman screaming, wolves howl. This was different. It was like someone had combined the roar of a grizzly with the scream of a person in agony, but then amplified it by 10. Common sense said to get in my tent, zip it up, and pray whatever made that sound would move on. But curiosity, stupid, reckless curiosity, got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy mag lights that could double as a weapon, and started walking toward where I thought the sound had come from. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mouth went completely dry. Every step I took, I kept asking myself what the hell I was doing. But I kept going anyway. I'd made it maybe 50 feet from my camp when I heard movement in the trees ahead. Branches breaking, not like a squirrel or even a deer, but like something big was moving fast. I swung my flashlight in that direction and caught just a glimpse of something. It was only for a split second, but what I saw has haunted me for decades. A massive dark figure moving between the trees, heading toward the creek. The flashlight beam only caught its side and back as it moved away, but what struck me was the size. This thing was huge, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. I could tell because it passed by a section of the old corral that I knew was about 6 feet high, and this thing cleared it by a good margin. It was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur, not like a bear's fur, which is shaggy and uneven. This was more uniform, almost sleek, and it moved upright on 2 legs, but with this bizarre fluid gait that was nothing like a human's walk. It covered ground incredibly fast, like an Olympic sprinter, but totally silent except for the branches it was breaking as it passed. I stood there, flashlight still pointed where I'd seen it, my hand shaking so badly the beam was dancing all over the place. Then I heard it thrashing through the brush by the creek, splashing through the water. Whatever it was crossing the creek and heading up the other side of the ravine. Part of me wanted to follow, to get a better look, but a stronger, smarter part kept me rooted to the spot. After a few minutes, when the sounds had faded, I practically ran back to my campsite, stumbling twice in my panic. I immediately built up my fire as big as I dared, throwing on every piece of wood I'd gathered earlier. The rational part of my brain was saying it was probably just a bear, maybe standing up momentarily as they sometimes do, but nothing about what I saw moved like a bear. Bears are fast, sure, but they're also lumbering. This thing moved with purpose, with agility. I stayed by that fire for hours, jumping at every sound. Around midnight, this smell hit me. It was unlike anything I'd experienced before, a mix of wet dog, rotting oranges, and this musty, moldy odor like fruit that's gone bad. It was so strong it made my eyes water, and it seemed to be coming from all around the campsite, not just one direction. Then I started hearing movement again. Not like before, not running, but slow, deliberate movement circling my camp just beyond the firelight. Snapping twigs, rustling leaves. Sometimes it would stop for 10 or 15 minutes, then start up again from a different direction. Whatever it was watching me. I kept feeding the fire, using up almost all my wood. I had my hunting knife out, though what good it would have done against something that size, I don't know. I kept the mag light on too, sweeping it around periodically, but never saw anything in the beam. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally won out over fear, and I must have dozed off sitting up against my backpack. When I woke up, it was full daylight, maybe 6 a.m. The fire had burned down to embers, and the woods around me were alive with normal morning sounds, birds, squirrels, the creek. My first instinct was to pack up and get the hell out of there. But then I thought about how people would react if I told them what happened. They'd think I was crazy or that I'd dreamed it. I needed some kind of proof. So I spent about an hour searching the area where I'd seen the figure cross to the creek. The ground was mostly pine needles and hard dirt, not great for tracks, but near the creek I found areas where water had been splashed up on the rocks, recent splashes that were still wet when everything else was dry. And on the other side, some of the brush was broken and bent in a path leading up the hill. Not definitive proof of anything, but something had definitely come through there. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had before and hiked out. Constantly looking over my shoulder, I felt exposed, vulnerable. When I got back to the trailhead, I saw a group saddling up horses, a guided trail ride from the looks of it. The guide was this weathered old guy, maybe in his 60s, who'd clearly spent his life in these mountains. I don't know what made me do it, but I approached him while his clients were getting ready and told him what happened. I expected him to laugh, but he didn't. He just listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned in and said, "Sounds like you had yourself an encounter with a Sasquatch." He told me he'd been working these mountains for 40 years and had similar experiences 3 times. He never saw one clearly, but heard the screams, smelled the smell, found tracks. He said the old-timers who taught him the trails had their own stories too, going back generations. They don't bother you if you don't bother them, he said. But they're curious. They watch us. Been doing it for centuries. Before I left, I stopped at the Forest Service station to return my wilderness permit. While I was there, another hiker came in looking shaken. He was reporting that something had taken half his food supply the previous night. The weird part? He'd hung his food bags from a tree branch at least 7 feet off the ground, the way you're supposed to do, to keep bears away. Whatever took it hadn't torn the bags or knocked them down. They were just emptied, with some items neatly set aside, and then the bags were left hanging where they were. The ranger was saying it didn't sound like bear behavior at all. I didn't stick around to hear more. I got in my car and drove 3 hours without stopping, trying to process what had happened. That was over 3 decades ago. I've been back to the Sierras many times since then, but never to that particular spot. I've heard other strange sounds in the wilderness over the years, but nothing like that scream. I've tried to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe even another hiker playing a prank, but deep down I know better. Whatever I encountered that night wasn't something science has properly classified. The old horse guide called it a Sasquatch. Others call it Bigfoot. I don't know what it was, but I know what I saw, what I heard, and what I smelled. I still go camping and hiking regularly. I still love the wilderness, but I never go without remembering that night. And I never again camp anywhere without bringing enough wood to keep a fire going all night long. And sometimes when I'm alone in the woods and the wind dies down, I catch myself listening, waiting, wondering if I'll hear that scream again. Story 13. I've been debating whether or not to share this for years. I'm not a writer, and I'm not looking for attention. I just need to tell someone who might actually believe me, because my family sure as hell doesn't anymore. This happened back in June of 2002 when I was 17. My Uncle Pete had invited me and my cousin Ben on our annual camping trip in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. We'd been doing these trips since I was 12, but this one was different. This one, I still have nightmares about it. We'd driven deeper into the forest than usual, following these old dirt roads until Pete's truck couldn't go any further. We hiked maybe 3 or 4 miles into the wilderness with our gear before finding this perfect spot between 2 ridges with a small creek running through it. It was beautiful. Tall pines everywhere, the sound of water running over rocks, birds chirping, the kind of peaceful that city people pay good money to experience. I remember Pete saying, "This is it, boys, not another soul for miles." He wasn't wrong. We hadn't passed anyone on the trails all day. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and spent the evening doing what you do camping, eating hot dogs and beans, telling the same old stories we always did, watching stars come out one by one until the sky was filled with them. I was pretty tired from the hike in, so I went to bed earlier than Pete and Ben. I could hear them laughing by the fire as I drifted off to sleep. The next morning was clear and cool. We had a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee. Pete and Ben wanted to try fishing in the creek, but I wasn't really into fishing, never had the patience for it. So I told them I wanted to explore a bit, check out the ridge line. "Don't go too far," Pete said, like he always did. "Be back by lunch. Take your whistle." I grabbed my small day pack, just water, a granola bar, my pocket knife, and this cheap emergency whistle Pete insisted we all carry. I headed out following a faint trail up the ridge. It wasn't marked or anything, just a path where animals or maybe hikers had trampled down the undergrowth. The hike up was awesome. I remember feeling so free, just me in the forest. I reached the top of the ridge and could see for miles. Endless green, rolling hills, not a building or road in sight. I followed the ridge for a while, then spotted what looked like an old game trail cutting across toward the next hill. Without really thinking about it, I decided to follow it. I'd been hiking for over an hour when I realized I'd lost track of time. The trees were thicker here, blocking out most of the sun, making it hard to tell what time it was. I checked my watch, almost 11. I figured I should head back soon, but when I turned around, nothing looked familiar. That's when the first flutter of panic hit me. I tried retracing my steps, but the game trail wasn't as clear as I'd thought. I ended up following what I thought was the right path, but after 15 minutes, I knew I was going the wrong way. The trees were different, taller and more spread out, with thick underbrush between them. I didn't recognize anything. I stopped and tried to orient myself. The sun was high overhead now, so I couldn't even use that to figure out direction. I remembered Pete telling me if I ever got lost to find high ground. So I started climbing what looked like a small hill, hoping to spot something familiar. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten, like unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just this heavy silence pressing down. The hair on my arms stood up. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that when the forest goes silent, something's wrong. I sat down on this big rock to catch my breath and try to figure out what to do. That's when I heard it. A loud crack, like someone stepping on a thick branch and breaking it. Then another, and another, like footsteps, but heavy, really heavy, maybe 40 yards away. My first thought was bear. We knew there were black bears in the forest. Pete had gone over what to do if we encountered one. Make yourself look big, back away slowly, don't run. But something felt different, wrong. I squinted, trying to see through the trees in the direction of the sound. And that's when I saw movement. Something large moving between the trunks. At first, it was just glimpses. A dark shape shifting in the shadows. Then it emerged into a small clearing ahead of me. I couldn't breathe. My whole body just froze. What I was seeing, it wasn't possible. It was walking on two legs, not like a bear standing up occasionally. This thing was walking upright naturally. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with a massive, wide body and these long arms that hung down near its knees. The whole body was covered in this dark brown hair, not fur exactly, more like matted hair, longer in some places than others. Its face had less hair, showing dark skin underneath. The eyes were deep set, shadowed, but I could feel them looking around the clearing. I remember every detail so clearly, the way it moved. Not clumsy or awkward like you'd expect something that big to be. It was deliberate, powerful. It moved through the clearing slowly, stopping occasionally to sniff the air, and then it stopped completely. Its head turned slowly in my direction, and it looked right at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that this was no man in a costume, no bear, nothing I could explain away. It opened its mouth slightly, revealing wide, thick lips and large, flat teeth, not fangs like a predator, more like a gorilla's teeth, but bigger. Then it made a sound I'll never forget, not a roar like a bear or a scream like a mountain lion, It was deeper, more guttural, starting low and building into this powerful sound that seemed to vibrate through the trees and into my chest. It echoed off the hills around us, making it impossible to tell where it ended and where the echo began. I stumbled backward in terror and tripped over a rock, falling hard onto my back. The wind got knocked out of me, and as I gasped for air, I saw it take a step toward me. The ground actually shook, not like an earthquake, but I could feel the impact of its foot through the earth. Pure instinct took over. I scrambled to my feet and ran. No plan, no direction, just blind panic driving me as fast as my legs could carry me through the trees. I could hear crashing behind me, branches breaking, undergrowth being trampled. It was following me. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs were burning, branches whipped at my face and arms, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. Eventually I tripped over a root and went down hard, sliding down a small embankment and landing behind a massive fallen log. I lay there, trying not to make a sound, despite my lungs screaming for air. I could hear movement in the forest. Heavy steps, branches snapping, but they were growing more distant. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the forest fell silent again. I stayed hidden for a long time, afraid to move. When I finally gathered the courage to peek over the log, there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. But I knew what I'd seen. With shaking legs, I got up and tried to figure out where I was. I had no idea which direction the campsite was. I found a small stream and decided to follow it downhill, hoping it would lead to the creek near our camp. I followed that stream for what felt like forever, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over my shoulder. Eventually, the stream joined a larger one, and I spotted a trail running alongside it, an actual hiking trail. I nearly cried with relief. I was making my way down this trail when I heard someone calling my name. It was Uncle Pete. He looked worried, sick, sweaty, and out of breath. Jesus Christ, Jason, where the hell have you been? It's almost 4. We've been looking everywhere. I just stood there, unable to speak at first. How could I tell him what I'd seen? He'd think I was crazy or making it up. I got lost, I finally managed to say. Took a wrong turn somewhere. He gave me a long look, like he knew there was more to it. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. That night at camp, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every sound from the forest made me jump. Pete kept asking what was wrong, and finally, I told them. Not all at once, but in pieces, between long pauses and staring into the fire. I told them about the silence in the forest, about the creature I'd seen, about the roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once, about running for my life. Ben laughed at first, thought I was making it up. Pete didn't laugh. He just got real quiet, poking at the fire with a stick. People talk about things in these woods, he finally said. Hunters mostly. Strange sounds, large footprints, never gave it much thought. We packed up and left the next morning, a day earlier than planned. Pete made up some excuse about bad weather coming, but I knew the real reason. Something had changed in the way he looked at the forest around us, like he was seeing it differently now. That was 21 years ago. I'm 38 now. I've never gone back to Ouachita, never gone hiking alone again, never strayed from marked trails when I do go out. Some things change you forever. I've told this story a few times over the years. Most people react like Ben did. They laugh, or they smile in that way that says they think I'm exaggerating. A few, like Pete, get quiet, like maybe they've seen something too, or know someone who has. I don't know what I saw that day. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and for a moment, it looked into my eyes and I looked into its. And in that moment, I understood what true fear feels like. I still have nightmares about those eyes looking at me through the trees, about that sound echoing through the forest. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear heavy footsteps outside my window. Even now, all these years later, writing this makes my hands shake. If you've ever been alone in the deep woods and felt that sensation of being watched, or heard something you couldn't explain, maybe you understand. For everyone else, count yourselves lucky. There are things in this world we don't understand, things we aren't meant to understand, and sometimes they're watching us from just beyond the trees. Story 14. I'm still having trouble sleeping through the night. It's been 6 years now, but every time I hear something outside our house at night, I'm right back in that tent in the Idaho mountains, frozen with fear. This happened in the summer of 2017. My husband Mark and I were both 32 at the time, and we'd been planning this backcountry camping trip for months. We're both experienced hikers, or at least we were. I grew up with a dad who took us camping every summer, and Mark was an Eagle Scout. We'd done plenty of overnight hikes together, but this was our first multi-day trek into truly remote wilderness. We chose a spot in northern Idaho, about 3 hours from where we lived in Spokane. The area wasn't on any popular hiking routes, which was exactly what we wanted. Just us and the wilderness. No cell service, no other people. Complete solitude. We parked our Subaru at this tiny, unmarked trailhead we found through some obscure hiking forum. The plan was to hike about 6 miles in, set up camp for 3 nights, and then hike back out. We had all our gear: tent, sleeping bags, water filter, camp stove, enough food for 4 days, the works. Mark even brought his good camera to photograph wildlife. The hike in was gorgeous. It was late June, perfect weather, not too hot. The trail followed an old logging road for the first couple miles before narrowing into what was basically just a game trail. We crossed a few small streams and climbed about 2,000 feet in elevation. The forest was mostly pine and fir trees, super dense in some spots, with occasional clearings where you could see for miles. By mid-afternoon, we found this perfect spot to camp, a small clearing near a crystal-clear creek, surrounded by tall pines. You could hear the water bubbling over the rocks. It was absolutely peaceful. We set up our tent, hung our food bag from a tree branch, bear country, you know, and built a small fire ring with stones from the creek bed. That first night was perfect. We sat by the fire, made freeze-dried stroganoff on the camp stove, and shared a flask of whiskey while watching the stars come out. No weird noises, nothing unusual, just the normal forest sounds, wind in the trees, the occasional owl, the creek flowing nearby. The second day, our only full day there, as it turned out, we explored the area. We followed the creek upstream for a couple miles, found this amazing little waterfall emptying into a deep pool. Mark took photos while I sat on this sun-warmed rock with my feet in the cold water. We saw deer tracks, some kind of weasel or marten darting through the underbrush, and even spotted a bald eagle soaring overhead. Not another human footprint anywhere. It felt like our own private wilderness. We got back to camp around 4 in the afternoon, made an early dinner, and spent the evening planning future trips while the fire burned down to embers. Mark wanted to try the Olympics next year, and I was pushing for the Sawtooth Mountains in central Idaho. Normal conversation, normal evening, nothing to suggest what was coming. We climbed into our tent around 10 o'clock. It was still light out, those long summer evenings in the north, but we were tired from hiking all day. We zipped our sleeping bags together and read our books with headlamps for maybe half an hour before turning them off to go to sleep. I don't know exactly what time it started. Maybe midnight? We'd both been asleep for a while when I woke up to a soft tapping sound on the tent. At first I thought it was starting to rain, but the sound wasn't right. It was too irregular, and it seemed to be coming from one spot rather than all over. I nudged Mark. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He woke up immediately. "Yeah, probably just pine cones falling." But then another one hit and another. They were hitting our tent at regular intervals, like once every 20 seconds or so. Not random like they were falling naturally. "That doesn't sound random," I said. Mark sat up and put on his headlamp. "I'll check it out." I grabbed his arm. Be careful. He unzipped the tent and stepped outside. I could see the beam of his headlamp sweeping across the clearing. After a minute, he came back in. Nothing out there, he said. Just some pine cones around the tent. Probably squirrels dropping them. We tried to go back to sleep, but the tapping started again about 10 minutes later. This time, it was coming from a different direction. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps circling our campsite, just beyond the clearing. Not like a deer or elk moving through the forest. These were deliberate steps, punctuated by the sound of branches breaking. Whatever it was big. Mark, I whispered, clutching his arm. Something's out there. I hear it, he said. His voice was steady, but I could feel how tense he was. The footsteps stopped. Then came the breathing, deep, heavy breathing just beyond the tree line. It wasn't an animal panting, it was slower, more controlled, almost like someone trying to intimidate us by making sure we heard them. We sat completely still, barely breathing ourselves. I remember feeling like my heart was going to explode. It was beating so hard. Mark reached for his pocket knife, like that would do anything against whatever was out there. Then came the scream. I've never heard anything like it before or since. It started low, almost like a moan, then rose in pitch until it became this horrifying sound that was somewhere between a human scream and an animal roar. It echoed through the trees and seemed to go on forever. When it finally stopped, I realized I was crying. Mark was holding me, and I could feel him shaking too. What the hell was that? I whispered. I don't know, he said. Maybe a mountain lion or a bear. But we both knew it wasn't either of those. I'd heard mountain lions before. They sound like a woman screaming. This was different, deeper, more powerful, and somehow more deliberate. The pine cones started hitting the tent again, but harder now. Then small rocks. One hit right above my head with enough force to make me flinch. Whatever was out there, it was trying to provoke us, trying to get us to come out. We heard the footsteps again, moving around the clearing. They'd stop. Then we'd hear another pine cone or rock hit the tent. Then more footsteps. This went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. I was terrified, but also angry. This was our campsite. We hadn't done anything wrong. I remember whispering to Mark, should we make noise? Try to scare it away? He shook his head. Let's just wait it out. Then the footsteps changed. They were faster, heavier, and coming straight at our tent. I don't remember making a conscious decision to run. 1 second we were frozen in fear, and the next we were grabbing our headlamps and scrambling out the tent's rear entrance. Mark ripped through the mesh with his knife when the zipper got stuck. We left everything. Sleeping bags, backpacks, food, everything except the clothes we were wearing and our headlamps. Mark had his pocket knife, and I somehow had grabbed my water bottle that was next to my sleeping bag. We ran down the trail in the dark, our headlamps bouncing wildly. I kept expecting to feel something grab me from behind, but nothing did. Whatever had been stalking us, it didn't follow, at least not closely enough for us to hear or see. We didn't stop running until we physically couldn't anymore. I remember bending over, hands on my knees, gasping for breath, certain that any moment that thing would emerge from the darkness behind us. But it never did. We walked the rest of the way back to the trailhead, jumping at every sound. The 4-hour hike in took us less than 3 hours to get out, even in the dark. We reached our car just as dawn was breaking. The next day, after a few hours of fitful sleep at a motel, Mark's brother offered to go back with him to retrieve our gear. They drove to the trailhead, but when they got there, Mark couldn't do it. He couldn't make himself go back up that trail. His brother didn't understand. He thought we were overreacting to normal forest noises, but he hadn't been there. He hadn't heard that scream. We ended up reporting the abandoned gear to the Forest Service, telling them we'd been scared off by what we thought might be a bear. The ranger looked at us skeptically, but took our information. We never heard anything back about our stuff. It's been 6 years, and I still can't explain what happened that night. I've researched everything from bears to mountain lions to wolves, trying to find something that matches what we experienced. Nothing fits except one thing: Bigfoot encounters. I know how that sounds. Before this, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed to have seen a Bigfoot. But the thrown objects, the intimidation behavior, the scream, it all matches other reported encounters, and nothing else makes sense. What I do know is that my relationship with the wilderness fundamentally changed that night. I used to feel at home in the forest. Now I feel like an intruder, like there are parts of the wilderness where humans simply aren't welcome. We've gone car camping a few times since then, always in established campgrounds with other people nearby, but backcountry hiking, never again. Mark and I don't talk about it much anymore. When friends ask why we stopped backpacking, we usually make up some excuse about bad knees or lack of time. It's easier than trying to explain something we still don't understand ourselves. But sometimes, when we're alone, Mark will look at me and say, "Do you ever think about that night?" And I always know exactly what he means. I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, certain I've just heard that scream again. It never leaves you completely, the knowledge that there's something out there in the darkness, something we don't understand, something watching and waiting. Story 15. I still have nightmares about what happened at Tiger Mountain. It's been 16 years, and I can close my eyes and hear those screams like it was yesterday. I've never written this down before, but maybe getting it out will help. It was July of 2007. 6 of us decided to go camping near North Bend, Washington. Me, Mark, my girlfriend Sarah, our friends Jason and Kate, and Mike and Jen. We were all in our late 20s, had decent jobs, and needed to disconnect from the city for a weekend. Jason suggested this spot just outside Tiger Mountain that he knew about. Not an official campground, but a beautiful ridge with a clearing perfect for setting up tents. The day started perfectly. We arrived around noon, hauled our gear up to the ridge, and set up 3 tents in a clearing surrounded by towering pines and firs. We also brought this big screened canopy thing for eating under, protection from rain or bugs. The weather was perfect, mid-70s, clear skies. You could see for miles from parts of the ridge. We spent the afternoon hiking, drinking beers, and gathering firewood. I remember feeling so relaxed, that specific kind of calm you only get when you're away from everything. Around sunset, we grilled burgers on our portable grill and sat around talking. That's when I first noticed something felt off. The forest had gone completely silent. At first, I didn't consciously register it, but there was this moment when I was mid-sentence and I just stopped talking. Everyone looked at me and I said, "Does it seem really quiet to anyone else?" Jason nodded immediately. "Yeah, no birds." In forests, there's always background noise, birds, squirrels, the wind in the trees, but there was nothing, just this heavy silence pressing down on us. We tried to shake it off, telling ourselves it was nothing, but we all felt it. As it got darker, we built up the campfire and huddled closer. Nobody was saying it, but we were all staying near the fire for comfort. The darkness beyond our little circle of light seemed absolute. I kept thinking I saw movement in the trees, but convinced myself it was just shadows from the fire. By 11 o'clock, we were all feeling uneasy. The conversation had died down, and we were mostly just staring into the flames. That's when we heard it, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the slope below our camp. Not an animal on 4 legs, but the distinct rhythm of something walking on 2 feet. Something big. "What the hell is that?" Mike whispered. The footsteps stopped. Whatever it was just standing there in the darkness, watching us. Jason grabbed his high-powered flashlight, one of those super bright LED ones, and aimed it down the slope. Before he could turn it on, this scream erupted from about 100 yards away. I've spent years trying to find the right words to describe that sound. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I recognized. It was high-pitched but incredibly powerful, like it came from something with massive lungs. It echoed through the trees and hit us physically, like a wave of sound. Before we could even react, two more screams answered the first, from completely different directions. One from our left, deeper in the forest, and another from behind us, up the ridge. Three distinct voices, communicating. "They're surrounding us," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm so hard it left bruises. The realization hit us all at once. We weren't dealing with one whatever it was. There were at least three, and they had us surrounded. Jason finally clicked on his flashlight, sweeping it down the slope. The beam caught nothing but trees and underbrush, but the moment the light came on, all hell broke loose. They started charging, not just from one direction, from all sides. The ground literally shook, branches snapped, small trees swayed and bent as something massive pushed through them. The sound was terrifying. Not just footsteps, but this powerful movement through the underbrush, deliberate and coordinated. Kate started crying. Mike was yelling, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" over and over. I just stood there frozen until Sarah pulled my arm. "We need to go now," she screamed. We didn't even think about packing up. We just ran, all of us sprinting through the dark, toward where we'd parked our cars, about a quarter-mile away. I've never run so fast in my life. I could hear them still coming, still surrounding us, paralleling our path through the woods. I kept waiting to feel something grab me from behind. Every few seconds, one of them would let out another one of those screams, like they were coordinating the pursuit. They were herding us, I realize now, driving us away. We reached the cars, Jason and Kate's SUV and my truck. We piled in, 3 in each vehicle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Just as I started the engine, one final scream came from right by our abandoned campsite. It was different from the others, longer, more forceful, almost triumphant. We tore down that dirt road like maniacs, not saying a word until we hit the main highway. We ended up at a 24-hour diner in North Bend, all of us shaking, trying to process what had happened. We debated calling the police, but what would we say? That we were chased by something we couldn't identify, that we'd abandoned thousands of dollars of camping gear because of scary noises. "They'll think we're drunk or high," Jason said. He was right. We got hotel rooms for the night. None of us slept. At dawn, Jason, Mike, and I decided we had to go back for our stuff. The women refused to come, and I didn't blame them. Driving back in daylight, I kept telling myself we'd overreacted, that it was probably just some elk or maybe even local kids messing with us. But deep down, I knew better. The campsite was destroyed, not just messed up, systematically taken apart. Our tents had been pushed in and trampled. My tent had a long tear down one side, like it had been grabbed or slashed. The screened canopy was partially collapsed. Its metal poles actually bent and snapped. Our coolers had been thrown around, contents scattered. But the footprints, God, the footprints. They were everywhere around the camp, in the soft dirt. Massive, 16 inches at least, with 5 toes clearly visible in the deeper impressions. Human-shaped, but far too big. They showed a clear pattern. They had literally circled our camp, coming in from different directions. "Look at this," Mike called out. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, pointing to where something large had moved through the underbrush. Branches were broken off at around 8 feet up, 8 feet. The brush was flattened in paths leading down the slope. Jason walked a little way down one of these paths and called us over. "Holy shit," he whispered. There was a wall of thorny brambles, the kind that would tear your skin to shreds if you tried to push through them. Something had gone straight through them, like they were nothing, leaving a tunnel-like opening. We gathered what undamaged gear we could salvage and got out of there. In the car, nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Mike said what we were all thinking. "Those were Sasquatch, weren't they?" I'd always been skeptical about Bigfoot. It seemed ridiculous that something that large could exist without definitive proof. But standing there, looking at those footprints, seeing the destruction, remembering those screams and how coordinated their movements were, I knew this wasn't just one creature, and they hadn't stumbled upon us by accident. They had surrounded us, communicated with each other, and deliberately driven us away from their territory. They used intimidation tactics, and it worked perfectly. We never reported it officially. Who would believe us? We told our girlfriends what we found, swore each other to secrecy, and tried to move on. Sarah and I broke up 6 months later, not directly because of this, but the experience changed something in me. I became obsessed with researching similar encounters, looking for patterns. The nightmares are always the same. I'm back in that forest, but I'm alone. I hear those footsteps coming from all directions. I hear those screams, but in my dreams I can't run. I just stand there as they close in. I haven't been camping since. I can't even hike in dense forests without panic setting in. Sometimes when I'm home alone at night and the house gets too quiet, I turn on music or the TV just to have some background noise. Because the silence reminds me of how the forest went quiet just before they came for us. Like the whole natural world knew to shut up when they were near. I still don't know why they didn't hurt us. They easily could have. Instead, they just wanted us gone. It was their territory, and we were trespassing. That's the only explanation that makes sense to me. Whatever's out there in those woods, they're intelligent. They communicate, they coordinate, and they definitely don't want us there. Story 16. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old. My dad taught me everything. How to track, when to shoot, how to field dress a deer. I've spent more time in the woods than most folks spend at their office jobs. Never been the type to get spooked easily. Coyotes, wild hogs, even the occasional black bear. I've seen plenty of wildlife in East Texas over the years. But what I saw last November in the Angelina River bottom near Reclaw, I still can't make sense of it. I've kept this mostly to myself for months now. My wife knows, and I told my brother, but that's it. People around here would think I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone else has seen the same thing. It was the second weekend of deer season, a Saturday afternoon. Perfect hunting weather, about 55 degrees, slight breeze from the northwest, clear skies. I was set up in my usual spot in the Wilkins pasture that borders my lease. Been hunting there for almost 15 years now, so I know every tree, every dip in the land, every game trail. I got to my spot around 2 in the afternoon. I don't use a blind, never liked feeling boxed in. Instead, I have this folding chair with a shooting stick that I set up against a big oak about 20 yards back from the edge of the clearing. Gives me a perfect view of the feeder I have set up about 80 yards out, plus good visibility of the neighbor's pasture to my left. The first couple hours were slow, saw a few squirrels, watched a red-tailed hawk hunting in the distance. Around 4:30, a group of does finally showed up at the feeder. 4 of them, 2 mature does and 2 younger ones. I already had my buck for the season, so I was hoping to take a doe for the freezer. I raised my Remington 270 and looked through the scope, watching them feed. The rifle's familiar weight felt good in my hands. I'd re-sighted it just the week before, and it was shooting true at 100 yards. Through the 3 to 9 by loopholed scope, I could see the does clearly, watching their ears twitch, how they'd take a few bites, then raise their heads to look around. That's when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, off to my left in the neighbor's pasture, the Johnson's land. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Probably just another deer moving through, I thought. But something about the movement didn't seem right. It wasn't the quick, nervous movements of a deer. It was deliberate. I swung my rifle over, keeping my eye to the scope. What came into my field of view made my blood run cold. There, walking across the open pasture, was something I can only describe as massive. It was upright, walking on 2 legs like a man, but it was no man. The creature was covered in dark brown hair or fur. Not patchy like a mangy bear, but fully covered. Its arms were long, swinging at its sides as it walked with purpose across the clearing. My first thought was that it had to be one of the Johnson's boys playing a prank. They've got 3 sons, all hunters, but as I steadied my breathing and really looked at this thing through my scope, I knew it wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long, and the height, this thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. No one in the Johnson family stands over 6 feet. I've seen plenty of bears in my life, including some big ones in Arkansas and East Tennessee. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk upright for that distance or with that kind of steady gait. This thing was walking like it was going somewhere specific, head facing forward, arms swinging naturally at its sides. I tried to estimate its weight based on its bulk. Had to be at least 500 pounds, maybe more. It wasn't fat, though. It looked powerful, muscular. The way it moved showed strength, but there was also something fluid about it. Graceful, almost, despite its size. My hands started shaking so bad I had to lower the rifle for a second and take a deep breath. The does at the feeder had already spooked and bolted. I hadn't even noticed them leaving. My entire focus was on this thing. I raised the rifle again, found it in my scope. It was still moving, about halfway across the Johnson pasture now. The pasture there is about 40 yards of open space between 2 sections of dense woods. The creature was moving from east to west, from one tree line toward another. I couldn't move, couldn't call out, couldn't do anything but watch. My mouth had gone completely dry, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I've been in some dangerous situations before, nearly stepped on a cottonmouth once, had a wild hog charge me, but I've never felt fear like this. It was primal, deep, like my body knew something my mind couldn't fully process. The thing never looked in my direction, never broke its stride, just kept walking with purpose until it reached the tree line on the west side of the pasture and disappeared into the pines and underbrush. I kept my scope trained on that spot for what felt like forever, waiting to see if it would emerge somewhere else or come back. Nothing. It was gone. When I finally lowered my rifle, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool temperature. My legs felt weak, like I'd run a marathon. I packed up my gear in record time, constantly looking over my shoulder. The woods that had always felt like a second home to me suddenly felt alien and threatening. Every shadow, every rustle in the brush made me jump. I practically ran back to my truck, threw my gear in the bed, and got the hell out of there. On the drive home, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a bear, despite the way it walked. Maybe it was someone in a costume, though that made no sense this far out in the woods, on private property, during hunting season when people are armed. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, though the image through my scope had been crystal clear. I've spent hours online since then, reading about black bears in East Texas. They're rare but not unheard of. Yet none of the descriptions or videos of bears walking upright match what I saw. Bears walking on 2 legs look awkward, uncomfortable. This thing looked natural moving upright. That's when I started reading about Bigfoot sightings. I've always thought those stories were bullshit, campfire tales, the stuff of bad TV shows. But some of the descriptions matched what I saw, the height, the build, the way it moved. I even drove back out to the Johnson property the next day and asked if I could walk their pasture, claiming I was tracking a wounded deer. Old Man Johnson came with me. We found nothing. No tracks I could definitively say belonged to what I saw. The ground was pretty dry, and there's a lot of grass and leaves, but we did find a broken sapling near where the creature had entered the woods. The break was fresh, about 6 feet up, higher than most people could reach without jumping. When I asked Johnson if he or his boys had seen anything unusual lately, he gave me a strange look. Said his cattle had been acting skittish the past few weeks, bunching up at night when they usually spread out across the pasture. Said he'd found one of his deer feeders torn apart about a quarter mile into his property. He'd assumed it was vandals, or maybe a black bear. It's been 4 months now, and I haven't gone back to that hunting spot. Can't bring myself to. I've hunted other areas of my lease, always with a partner now, never alone. I've tried telling myself that what I saw must have been something explainable. A bear, a man, a trick of the light. But deep down, I know better. What I saw that day was something that shouldn't exist. Something that walks the woods of East Texas that most people will never see, and probably wouldn't want to. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe someone telling me this story. But I know what I saw through my scope that day. A massive, hair-covered, bipedal creature walking purposefully across that pasture in broad daylight. And now I can't help wondering how many times it might have been watching me over the years when I thought I was alone in those woods. I still hunt, still fish, still spend time outdoors. But something changed for me that day. The woods don't feel the same anymore. Every time I'm out there now, I feel watched, and every unusual sound makes me wonder if it's coming back, or if it never really left. I don't have any photos or videos, didn't think to grab my phone in the moment. My brain couldn't process anything beyond what I was seeing. All I have is what I remember, what I know I saw, and a lingering question that keeps me up some nights. If that thing is real, what else might be out there that we don't believe in? Story 17. I've never shared this experience online before. Honestly, I've barely talked about it with anyone outside the 3 friends who were with me that night. Every time I try to explain what happened, I see the skepticism in people's eyes before I even finish. But after stumbling across all your stories here, I finally feel like maybe someone will believe me. This happened about 4 years ago, near Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. I grew up in this area my whole life, so I know the local wildlife pretty well. I've seen deer, coyotes, black bears, you name it. What we saw that night wasn't any of those things. Not even close. It was a Friday in late October, and my friends Taylor, Mike, and Kayla had gone to see some horror movie at the theater in Morehead City. I don't even remember which one now, isn't that weird? Like my brain decided that whatever we saw afterward was the real horror show. We were driving back toward Atlantic Beach around 10:30 at night. I was behind the wheel of my old Honda Civic, nothing fancy, but it got us around. The night was really dark. No moon that I can remember. And the road connecting the mainland to the beach area has these stretches with no streetlights. Anyone who knows that area understands how pitch black it gets. We were all still hyped up from the movie, talking over each other about which parts scared us the most. Mike was in the passenger seat, while Taylor and Kayla were in the back. I remember Taylor was complaining about her boyfriend not answering her texts, and Kayla was trying to connect her phone to my car's Bluetooth to play music. We'd just come down this hill that leads to a sharp curve. Locals call it Dead Man's Curve because there have been so many accidents there over the years. You have to slow down a lot to take it safely. I was doing maybe 30 miles per hour, which is still probably too fast for that turn, but I've driven it hundreds of times. As we approached the curve, my headlights swept across the right side of the road, where there's just a narrow shoulder before the tree line starts. That's when we saw it. At first, I thought someone had dumped a pile of dark clothes or maybe a black trash bag by the roadside. But then I realized it was moving. There was something crouched down at the edge of the road, hunched over what looked like roadkill. I distinctly remember thinking it was a possum. I could see the pale grayish fur and the long tail even from the car. But it was what was feeding on the possum that made me slam on the brakes. The figure was massive, much bigger than a person, and covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. It was crouched down on its haunches, but even hunched over it was huge. When my headlights hit it directly, it turned its head toward us. I'll never forget those eyes. They caught the light from my headlights and reflected back this yellowish-green glow, like when you shine a flashlight at a cat in the dark, but much more intense. It's that eye shine that still shows up in my nightmares sometimes. For maybe 2 seconds, we were all completely silent in the car. I had instinctively slowed almost to a stop. Then Taylor whispered, "What the fuck is that?" And that seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over us. The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, stood up. That's what really got to me. It stood up on 2 legs, smoothly, like a person would. It wasn't awkward or lumbering like a bear trying to stand. This thing was built to walk upright. Once it stood to its full height, I could see it was easily 7 or 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and its arms hung down much lower than a human's would. It was still holding something in one hand. I think it was part of the possum. Mike started yelling, "Go, go, go!" But I was frozen, my foot hovering between the brake and the gas. The creature took 3 steps toward the tree line, moving with this weird fluid grace that didn't seem right for something so large. Its stride was long, and it walked almost like a person but with a slight side-to-side sway. It never ran. That's one detail I can't shake. It didn't sprint away like a startled animal. It just turned and walked deliberately into the woods, like it wasn't afraid of us at all. By the time I finally hit the gas, it had disappeared into the trees. I gunned the engine and took that curve way too fast, the tires squealing. Everyone was talking at once. "Did you see that? What the hell was that thing? It was standing up. Go faster, April!" I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see it following us. We debated pulling over once we reached a more populated area, but none of us wanted to stop the car. We drove straight to Mike's house, since his parents were out of town, and we could all crash there. I don't think any of us wanted to be alone that night. Once we got to Mike's place and locked all the doors, we finally tried to process what we'd seen. Kayla was the first to say it out loud. That looked like Bigfoot. I'd always thought Bigfoot was just a myth, something made up for TV shows or to scare tourists. But what we saw wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. Bears don't move like that. They don't have that kind of eye shine, and they definitely don't stand and walk away on 2 legs with that kind of fluid motion. We spent hours that night looking up Bigfoot sightings online. It turns out there have been quite a few reports from the coastal areas of North Carolina over the years. People describing similar encounters. Tall, fur-covered creatures moving through the forests, crossing roads at night. Mike kept saying it must have been someone in a costume, but who would be out on that deserted stretch of road at night wearing a costume and eating roadkill? And no costume could have created that eyeshine or moved with that natural gait. The more I think about it, the more certain details stand out. The way its head sat directly on its shoulders with almost no visible neck, the broad, hunched back, the arms that seemed too long for its body. And the smell, I forgot to mention that. When we had the windows down earlier, there was this strong, musky odor in the air just before we saw it, like wet dog mixed with something rotten. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept seeing those eyes reflecting in my headlights, that massive shape standing up from its crouched position. The casual way it walked off, like it encountered cars full of terrified humans all the time. The next day, we debated going back to look for evidence, maybe footprints or fur caught on branches, but none of us had the courage. Taylor and Kayla were already trying to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was just a bear after all, or some kind of optical illusion created by the headlights and the shadows. But Mike and I knew better. We saw what we saw. I did drive past that spot again about a week later in broad daylight. I pulled over where I thought we'd seen it and walked along the roadside a bit. There was nothing unusual. No giant footprints, no tufts of mysterious fur. Just the normal debris you find on any roadside. But standing there, looking into those dense woods, I felt watched. The hair on my arms stood up, and I got back in my car and left quickly. For months afterward, I had trouble driving that road at night. I'd take the long way around, adding 20 minutes to my trip just to avoid that curve. Even now, years later, I slow down when I approach that spot. half expecting to see those eyes reflecting back at me. What bothers me most is that I still don't have any answers. I've become something of an amateur Bigfoot researcher since then. I've read books, listened to podcasts, even joined a few online groups where people share their encounters. Some of the stories sound so similar to what we experienced that it gives me chills. I've learned that the coastal areas of the Carolinas have a history of strange sightings. The local indigenous tribes have legends about forest giants. Fishermen tell stories of seeing large, hair-covered figures along remote shorelines. It makes me wonder if what we saw is something that's been living in these areas for centuries, mostly keeping to itself, but occasionally being spotted by people like us, who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right place at the right time. I don't know. As terrifying as it was, there's a part of me that feels almost privileged to have seen something that most people will go their whole lives never encountering. My friends and I don't talk about it much anymore. Taylor and Kayla have both moved away for college. Mike still lives around here, and sometimes when we get together, he'll make some joke about our furry friend, but I can tell he doesn't really want to discuss it seriously. But I know what I saw. I know it wasn't a bear or a person in a costume or any other animal native to North Carolina. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but was right there in front of us, eating a possum on the side of the road before calmly walking back into the forest that must be its home. I still drive that road frequently. Sometimes I slow down at that curve, scanning the tree line, wondering if it's out there watching. Sometimes I think about pulling over, walking into those woods with a camera, trying to find proof. But then I remember those eyes reflecting in my headlights, that massive figure standing to its full height, and I keep driving. Whatever it was we saw that night, I think it's probably best left alone, but I can't stop wondering about it. Did it tell others of its kind about us? Does it remember our car, our faces? Is it still out there, moving through the forests of coastal North Carolina, occasionally feeding on roadkill and startling the rare driver who happens to catch it in their headlights? I don't have answers. All I have is what I saw, what we all saw, and the certainty that there are things in this world that we don't understand, things that exist, whether we believe in them or not. Story 18. I've been keeping this to myself for almost 3 years, but I need to get it off my chest. I still get chills thinking about what happened, and to be honest, I'm still not sure what I heard that day at Clearwater Lake. It was early August, just a couple weeks before I would start my senior year of high school. Dad and I had planned this fishing trip for weeks. Just a simple day out on Clearwater Lake, about 40 minutes from our house in Pinecrest. We'd been going there since I was a kid, but we hadn't made it out much that summer because Dad had been working overtime at the factory. We got to the lake around 6 in the morning. The air was still cool, with that light fog hanging over the water that burns off once the sun gets higher. We launched our little 14-foot aluminum boat from the public ramp and headed toward our usual spot on the northeast side of the lake. This area is really secluded, practically untouched compared to the more popular fishing spots. The shoreline there curves into this little cove surrounded by these super dense woods. I mean dense, like can't see more than 15 feet in dense. We had decent luck that morning. I caught 2 decent-sized bass, and Dad got a nice catfish. Around noon, the summer heat really kicked in. It must have been around 90 degrees, and the humidity made it feel like you were breathing through a wet towel. Dad started getting drowsy. He'd pulled a double shift the day before, just so we could go fishing. "I'm going to close my eyes for 20 minutes, Luke," he said, settling back against the cooler we'd brought. "Wake me if you catch anything good." I was fine with that. I liked those quiet moments on the water, just me and my thoughts. We had drifted to about 25 feet from the shoreline. The water there is shallow, maybe 3 feet deep, with lots of lily pads and fallen trees, making it perfect for bass fishing. I could see the mud bottom in some spots where the water was clearer. Dad dozed off almost immediately, his fishing hat pulled down over his eyes, snoring softly. I cast my line toward a promising spot near some submerged logs and settled in. That's when I first heard it. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer coming down to the water to drink. We'd seen that plenty of times before, but this was different. The sound was distinct. Kaploosh, gloomp, kaploosh, gloomp, like heavy footsteps moving through shallow water. The rhythm was what caught my attention. It wasn't the quick, nervous movements of a deer or the padding of a four-legged animal. It was measured, deliberate. 2 feet. Walking. I froze, my fishing rod gripped tight in my hands. The footsteps continued, moving parallel to the shoreline, about 50 or 60 feet away from us, partially obscured by a bend in the shore and some overhanging trees. I strained my eyes, trying to see what was making the noise, but the vegetation was too thick. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I glanced at Dad, still sleeping, and debated whether to wake him. Before I could decide, it happened. A roar. Not just any roar, the most terrifying, primal sound I've ever heard in my life. It started deep, like it was coming from the center of the earth, then built into this furious, throat-ripping howl that echoed across the water. It was deeper than a lion's roar, but had that same roar intensity. It didn't sound like a bear or anything I'd ever heard in nature documentaries. This was different, powerful, angry. The roar couldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like forever. As it faded, it was replaced by violent splashing, water flying everywhere, and then this high-pitched squealing, like some animal in absolute terror. It sounded like something was being attacked, being killed right there in the shallows. I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My whole body went cold despite the summer heat. Dad was still somehow asleep. I later learned he'd taken a sleeping pill that morning because his back was acting up. The squealing suddenly cut off, and there was more splashing, followed by the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush away from the shore. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, then silence again. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. All I know is that when I finally regained control of my body, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my fishing rod. I looked around frantically, trying to see if whatever made that sound was still nearby. There was nothing visible from the boat. The shoreline looked normal, peaceful even, with no sign of the violence I'd just heard. But I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched, like there were eyes on me from somewhere in those woods. As quietly as I could, I reached for the trolling motor controls. We have this small electric motor for quiet maneuvering around fishing spots. I turned it on to the lowest setting, just enough to start drifting us away from the shore without making much noise. The soft whir of the motor seemed deafening in the silence. Dad stirred as the boat started moving. He pushed his hat up, blinking in the sunlight. "Catch anything?" he mumbled, still half asleep. I couldn't even form words at first. My mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Dad, we need to go now." Something in my voice or face must have alarmed him because he sat up immediately, fully awake. "What's wrong? What happened?" "Something's in the woods," I said, my voice shaking. I heard it. It roared. "Dad, it killed something in the water." Dad didn't question me. That's one thing I've always appreciated about him. He takes me seriously. He quickly moved to the back of the boat and started the main outboard motor. "What did it sound like?" he asked as the engine rumbled to life. I tried to describe it, but words failed me. Not like anything I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a mountain lion. Bigger, angrier. As we accelerated away from the cove, I kept my eyes fixed on the shoreline, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees, but there was nothing. Just the dense wall of green, hiding whatever secrets lay behind it. We didn't speak much on the way back to the marina. Dad kept glancing at me, concern etched on his face. I was still trembling, replaying the sounds in my head over and over. When we reached the marina, Dad suggested we talk to Mike, who worked there. Mike had been running the place for over 20 years and knew everything about Clearwater Lake. If anyone would know what I might have heard, it would be him. Mike was cleaning fish at the station near the dock when we pulled up. He smiled and waved, but his expression changed when he saw my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Dad explained what had happened while I stood there, still feeling shaken. When he finished, I expected Mike to laugh it off, to tell me it was probably just a bear or maybe some hunters, but he didn't. Instead, he got this serious look on his face and glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned in closer. "You know, about 7 years ago, a news crew from the local station came out here," he said in a low voice. "They were investigating some Bigfoot sightings around the lake." I almost laughed. Bigfoot? Seriously? But the look on Mike's face stopped me. "I'm not saying that's what you heard," he continued. "But there've been stories around here for years. People hearing things in those woods that they can't explain. Hikers finding strange footprints. Campers packing up in the middle of the night because something was circling their tents." Dad looked skeptical. "Come on, Mike. Bigfoot." Mike shrugged. "I'm just telling you what I know. That northeast cove where you boys were fishing, that's where most of the reports come from." On the drive home, Dad tried to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe it was a bear attacking a deer. Maybe it was some kind of territorial dispute between animals. Maybe the sound carried strangely over the water, making it seem more unusual than it was. I nodded along, wanting to believe him, but I couldn't shake one detail that kept bothering me. Those footsteps in the water. They weren't the sound of a four-legged animal. They were bipedal, 2 feet, walking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that roar again. I kept thinking about those woods, how thick they were, how easy it would be for something large to live there, to move around without ever being seen by humans. The next day, I went online and started researching. I read accounts of Bigfoot sightings, listened to audio recordings people claimed were Sasquatch calls. None of them matched exactly what I'd heard, but some were disturbingly close. I've gone back and forth in my mind 1,000 times since that day. Sometimes I convince myself it was just normal wildlife, that my imagination got the better of me. But then I remember the distinct rhythm of those footsteps, the bone-chilling power of that roar, and I'm right back in that boat, frozen with fear. I haven't been back to Clearwater Lake since. Dad's gone a few times with his buddies, but I always make excuses. I can't bring myself to go near that cove again. Every time he comes back, he gives me this look, like he's checking to see if I've gotten over it. I haven't. Before that day, I was a skeptic. I laughed at shows about cryptids and monster hunters. I thought people who believed in Bigfoot were either attention seekers or just mistaking bears for something more exotic. Now, I'm not so sure. I don't know what's out there in the wilderness around my hometown. I don't know what made that sound at Clearwater Lake, but I know what I heard, and it wasn't anything that's supposed to exist in these parts. Sometimes, when I'm alone, especially at night, I find myself listening more carefully to the sounds outside my window. The wind in the trees, the distant calls of night animals, always listening for that roar, hoping I never hear it again, but somehow knowing that whatever made it is still out there, moving through the woods, watching and waiting.